Hey guys, welcome back to the Red Bed. Today I've gathered 2 hours of real-life Reddit stories to listen to while you unwind, fall asleep, or just have running in the background. It's a good mix of drama, revenge, and absolute insane situations that random people have gone through, and some of these are honestly very satisfying to hear. Also, I try to post these videos daily, so if you're enjoying them, make sure to subscribe. But now, kick back, relax, and enjoy as I progress through this hardcore world with my friends. This first story is about a vacation gone wrong, when a friend secretly took something deeply personal and valuable, only to deny everything until the truth came out in the most shocking way. I had just finished a vacation with a friend, and even now, thinking about it makes me feel sick. A few days into the trip, she took my purse without even asking. This wasn't just any purse. It was a Zadig and Voltaire bag my sister gave me for Christmas. It had huge sentimental value, and I'd spent years keeping it in perfect condition. The worst part was that she didn't even tell me. I only found out later that she used it to go to the laundromat. Along with that, she'd helped herself to my money inside. In that purse, I had about $40 in cash, around 60 euros in notes, and at least 20 euros in coins. There were also some quarters that had been a gift from my sister's best friend's mom. Altogether, it was over 100 euros, not to mention the purse itself. And then, she lost it. Just like that, gone. I was devastated. I didn't yell or blame her. I just cried. I told her I wasn't mad, only hurt. I explained how much that purse meant to me, how hard I'd worked to keep it safe all these years. Instead of apologizing, she rolled her eyes and brushed me off. She said in this irritated tone, "How much does it cost? I'll just replace it." But it wasn't about the money. It was about respect, about trust, about something deeply personal being taken from me. From that point on, she acted annoyed that I was even upset. No apology, no acknowledgement, just this cold attitude. By the last night of the trip, I had already decided that once we got home, I wasn't going to speak to her again. I stayed neutral, quiet, just waiting to go back. On the flight home, she asked me to keep her passport in my bag, even though she had her own backpack. I said yes, only because I didn't want to fight. When we landed, she snapped at me, asking if I had her passport. I was still so hurt, and I couldn't resist getting one jab in. I used her exact words from earlier in the week and said, "I was checking my bag the whole time to make sure your passport was there, but maybe it'll show up when we get off the plane." I regretted saying it right away. She blew up in front of other passengers. She finally acknowledged my feelings, but in the cruelest way. She sneered, "Well, at least I didn't throw a hissy fit, bawling, crying for hours over a purse." That was the last straw. When we got to baggage claim, I told her I wanted to check her suitcase for my purse. I said if she refused, I'd involve the police. She tried to claim it was a violation of privacy, which was ridiculous, given she had taken my purse in the first place. I told her if it wasn't there, she had nothing to worry about. After some back and forth, she shoved her suitcase at me, face red and shaking with rage. I opened a compartment and found a black trash bag. Inside that was a red Target bag, and inside that was my purse. Everything was still there, the cash, the euros, but the quarters were missing. I was so shocked I couldn't even ask why she had it hidden. I just said, "Thanks," grabbed my purse, and walked away. I got on the bus home and haven't spoken to her since. Later, she blocked me. No apology, no explanation. As a strange side note, her mom actually called me at 3 in the morning one night, crying. She told me how badly she feels treated by her daughter and her husband, how she's constantly belittled. Hearing that gave me some perspective, but honestly, I think my friend is just cruel and lacking empathy. At the end of the day, I got my purse back, but the whole thing left me shaken. I still don't know what she was trying to do or why she acted this way, and maybe I never will. I'm just relieved it's over. That's the end of the story. Wow, that was heavy. The way she doubled down instead of apologizing really stood out to me. It says a lot when someone can't admit they're wrong even after being caught. That moment with the layered bags inside her suitcase almost felt surreal, like something you'd see in a movie. What really sticks, though, is how draining it must have been to keep things neutral, just to avoid more conflict. Honestly, it makes me appreciate those friendships where respect and trust are just a given. This next story is about a guy who planned to enjoy some legal weed on vacation, only to end up way too high at dinner with his in-laws. I had been looking forward to this trip to Denver for weeks. Back home, weed isn't legal, and I've never been the type to buy anything shady. So when my wife and I landed in Colorado, along with her parents, the very first chance I got, I dragged her to a dispensary. Walking in felt like a dream. Rows of neat little jars, each with different strains, and a couple of friendly employees asking if I wanted a mellow body high, something energizing, or just something light to take the edge off. My answer, of course, was yes to all of the above. Without thinking about it, I bought way more than I could possibly consume in a single weekend. My wife just shook her head, already realizing I had no idea what I was doing. Since we couldn't exactly light up in public or in the hotel, I grabbed a package of edibles to hold me over. They were small ginger snap cookies, tiny little things, barely bigger than a quarter. When I opened the bag in our hotel room, the label said dose size, half a cookie. Half? Really? Who eats half a cookie? So I nibbled one, then ate the rest, then quickly stuffed down 2 more before my wife could notice. Fast forward 30 minutes, and we're in the back seat of her parents' rental car on the way to dinner. My stomach was growling, my face was hot, and my wife was giving me that look. By the time we sat down at the restaurant, I was sweating so much that the waiter asked if I was okay. I thought I whispered, "Keep it together, man," to myself, but apparently I said it directly to him. My wife kicked me under the table and hissed, "Bathroom, now." In the mirror, I could see how wrecked I looked. I splashed cold water on my face, but the paranoia was kicking in hard. Even using the bathroom felt like it was taking an eternity. When I finally got back to the table, I tried to act normal, nodding along to small talk with my father-in-law, but I couldn't follow a word. At one point, I stood up and waved my water glass dramatically across the restaurant to the waiter, begging for more water. To his credit, he came right over and suggested I eat some bread to help. I devoured every roll on the table like it was life-saving medicine, but I was still restless, still way too high, and asked my wife if we should check on our food. That was the breaking point. She snapped and demanded, "How many cookies did you eat?" I tried to shush her, saying I didn't want her parents to find out how messed up I was. She just stared back, exasperated, and said, "They're sitting 2 feet away. They know." I finally looked up and saw my in-laws silently watching me, both of them stone-faced. And let me tell you, in that moment, it felt like they'd been staring at me for hours. That's where this story ends. That one cracked me up because you could just feel the slow-motion train wreck building the whole time. The way he described time dragging in the bathroom had me laughing. Like, we've all had that moment where you're convinced way more time has passed than it actually has. And the detail about waving his water glass across the restaurant, that's pure gold. What really stood out, though, was his wife's reaction. You can just picture her sitting there, trying to hold it together while her parents watch this whole disaster unfold. This next story is about someone who thought they were saving a drowning man, only to realize they just interrupted a group of military divers mid-training. I've been crashing at my sister's place with her boyfriend, working at his lakeside bar to cover tuition and my couch rent. The state had opened back up, and while I wasn't exactly thrilled, I needed the job and a roof over my head. Most mornings, to give them space and to keep myself from doom scrolling all day, I went for runs along the lake. It's this massive, beautiful spot that even draws scuba divers because of an old flooded town at the bottom. On one of those runs, I was deep in my head when I saw something that stopped me cold. A dark shape floated up about 40 feet from shore. At first glance, this guy looked dead, face tilted back, eyes shut, bobbing like a buoy. Nobody else was around, and all I could think was, why is someone scuba diving alone at dawn? Isn't that like a guaranteed way to give yourself the bends? Like an idiot, I didn't shout out to see if he was okay. Nope. I decided to strip down to my underwear and leap in like I was about to star in an action movie. Only problem, my bare feet hit sharp rocks, and instead of a heroic dive, I stumbled into the water like a busted slinky. My contacts were in, so I squeezed my eyes shut and swam blind until I finally dared to peek. And there he was, staring directly at me, alive, very much alive. My brain froze, so all I could do was blurt out, "Are you okay?" The guy actually pulled out his regulator and said, completely calm, "Yes." I just floated there, treading water, trying to keep the panic from eating me alive. Then, out of nowhere, another diver surfaced behind me. I hadn't heard a thing. I shrieked so loud it probably carried across the lake. And then, as if the universe wanted to make me the punchline, more heads popped up around us. I'd basically swum into the middle of a silent audience, and they were all cracking up. The first guy, my supposed rescue mission, motioned towards shore, and I nodded. He swam with me, almost like he was escorting me back, while I tried to hide the fact that I was gasping for air. I couldn't stop giggling at how absurd it all was, and at one point I told him, "You're lucky you weren't actually dying, because it would have taken every ounce of strength I had to drag you this far." He just chuckled and offered to tow me in. No chance. Even if I had to dog paddle, I wasn't about to take that L in front of him. He teased me the rest of the way, and I secretly didn't mind it. Turns out they were cadets or fresh graduates from a military college, running open water drills after training in pools. I'd completely blown up their exercise. By the time we reached shore, I tried to walk out like I wasn't embarrassed, shoulders back, pretending like I meant to be there, in my sports bra and underwear in front of a bunch of military divers. Before I left, I tossed out an invite for them to swing by the bar for a drink later, then jogged off into the woods to find my clothes and nurse my pride. That story wraps up here. That was hilarious from start to finish. The part that really got me was the movie trailer dive that turned into a painful stumble off the rocks. That mental image is gold. I also loved how the divers just silently surfaced one by one, like something out of a prank show. And honestly, the way she owned the embarrassment by inviting them for a beer at the end, that sealed it for me. Sometimes the funniest stories come out of moments where you're just trying to do the right thing and end up looking ridiculous. This next story is about an ex who left her dog behind for months, only to suddenly demand him back after the narrator had taken on all the care and responsibility. When Chloe and I broke up about 14 months ago, it wasn't exactly smooth. She moved out, and before she left, she asked me if I could look after her senior dog, Frank, for a couple weeks, while she found a pet-friendly apartment. I agreed without hesitation because I loved that little dog. At first, I really thought it was temporary, but a couple of weeks turned into months. In the beginning, she would text now and then to ask how Frank was doing. She never offered to visit, though, and she never sent money for his food or vet care. Then, after a while, even those check-ins started fading away. By the 6-month mark, I finally messaged her and asked if she was planning to take him back anytime soon. I explained that his care wasn't cheap, and it was becoming a real responsibility. She replied the next day saying she was still looking for a place, and thanked me for handling everything. That was the last I heard from her for a long time. Fast forward to around the 10-month mark. Frank needed a pretty big vet procedure, and the bill came out to more than $300. At that point, I had also lost my job, so it was a tough expense. But I didn't even think about reaching out to her. She hadn't said a word in 4 months. I paid it myself, and from that moment on, I stopped thinking of Frank as her dog. To me, he was mine. Then, just last week, completely out of nowhere, Chloe showed up at my front door. She was smiling, telling me she had a new apartment, a new job, and even a new boyfriend. And then she said, almost casually, "I'm here for Frank. Thanks for watching him." Like it was just some quick favor. I told her no. I explained that she had abandoned him, that I'd been his only caretaker for more than a year, and that I'd covered all his food and medical bills. She immediately broke down, calling me a thief and insisting that Frank was her emotional support animal back when we were together. She even offered to pay me back for the vet surgery, but only in installments. I wasn't having it. I told her to get lost and shut the door. Since then, my phone has been blowing up with messages from her. Her new boyfriend even sent me some threats. And now I'm stuck with friends who can't agree. Some think I rescued Frank and that he's rightfully mine, while others think I'm just being spiteful and refusing to return what was hers. That story ends there. This one hits in such a complicated spot. On one hand, it's wild how quickly she just reappeared, expecting everything to be waiting for her. On the other, it really shows how much responsibility shifts when someone steps up for that long. What stood out most to me is how attached the narrator clearly got to the dog. It wasn't just temporary care anymore. And honestly, the sudden re-entry after more than a year just feels like a recipe for conflict. It's one of those situations where no matter what happens, someone's gonna walk away upset. This next story is about a kindergarten teacher who underestimated a student's abilities, only for that student to grow up and prove her wrong in the most unexpected way. Back when I was in kindergarten, things were already stacked against me a little bit. I had only just started talking a few months before school began, and because of that, my communication and development were behind the other kids. Before that, I had been in a special education preschool, which honestly was probably where I still belonged at that point. But instead, I ended up in general education with a teacher I'll call Mrs. S. From day one, she made it clear she didn't think much of me. While the other kids were practicing math problems or learning to read, she'd give me Play-Doh or coloring sheets. Over and over, she'd tell me I couldn't do what the other kids were doing, that I wasn't smart enough, and that I simply wasn't capable. For a kid, hearing that every single day stuck deep, and I began to build up a lot of resentment toward her. Toward the end of the school year, we had career day. Every student was supposed to dress up as what they wanted to be when they grew up. I went as a teacher. I even wore a little monocle for the look. I still have a photo somewhere of that costume. When Mrs. S asked what I was, I told her I was a teacher, but not like her. I said I'd be the kind of teacher who helps everyone, no matter what. And then, with all the confidence a kid could muster, I told her that one day I would become a teacher and prove her wrong. All she said back was, "I hope you do." Not long after that year ended, I switched schools. Fast forward about 20 years. I had worked my way through college and eventually earned my degree in both special and general education. After graduation, I got a job teaching kindergarten through second grade special education. The moment felt surreal, and I couldn't help but think back to that old classroom. On a whim, I decided to call my old elementary school, half convinced there was no way Mrs. S would still be there. But to my surprise, she was. When I got her on the phone, I introduced myself and told her what year I had been in her class. She actually remembered me and sounded happy to hear from a former student. I told her I'd just graduated and accepted a teaching position. She congratulated me warmly, saying how glad she was that I had proved her wrong. And that's when I said, "I told you I could," and hung up the phone. 11 years have passed since then, and I'm still teaching to this day. That story wraps up here. What a full circle moment that must have been. It's kind of amazing to think about how a single teacher's words can stick with someone for decades, whether good or bad. The career day part made me smile. Something so simple, but it carried so much weight later on. And honestly, it's just impressive how determined the narrator was to take that negativity and turn it into motivation for a career. It's one of those stories that makes you stop and appreciate the long game life sometimes plays. This next story is about a baby shower that turned tense when a family member tried to turn the celebration into their own surprise proposal. When I found out I was due in November, my husband and I decided to plan a small baby shower. We booked a little village hall, set out some snacks, a few silly games, and even planned a couple of speeches. It wasn't over the top, but it was exactly the kind of cozy celebration we wanted. My husband and I covered most of the costs, and my mother-in-law chipped in for desserts. A week before the shower, my brother texted me out of the blue. He asked if he could propose to his girlfriend during the party, since the whole family will be there. I told him no. I explained that I'd be thrilled to help him plan something special on another day, but this one was meant to be about the baby. He pushed back a bit and even got my mom involved, who said it would be so lovely and 2 birds, 1 stone. I still stood firm and said no again. At the time, I thought that was the end of it. When the shower finally came around, everything was going smoothly at first. People were mingling, the food was out, and the atmosphere was lighthearted. Then, during the toasts, my mom suddenly called my brother up to say a few words. Right away, I noticed the way he was patting his pocket, and my stomach dropped. He started talking about love and family, and before he could fully go down on one knee, I got up. I walked over, gently took the mic, and said something along the lines of, "We love you guys, but we're not doing this today. Let's keep today focused on the baby, and we'll help you celebrate properly soon." The whole room went silent. His girlfriend looked embarrassed and bolted for the restroom. My brother's face went red, and he stormed out not long after, saying I had humiliated him. The rest of the shower felt heavy and awkward, even though some guests quietly told me afterward that proposals at other people's events are tacky. That night, the family group chat absolutely exploded. My mom called me controlling and insisted she had cleared the surprise with the venue, as if that made any difference. I reminded her that I had said no more than once, and that consent matters when it comes to events too. My brother argued that this was the only chance he had to propose with everyone present, since his girlfriend's sister was supposed to fly in later. I told him we all would have shown up for him any day he asked. By the next morning, I was still so frustrated that I sent him an invoice. It was itemized for half the hall rental and the extra drinks package, about 220 pounds. I wrote that since he tried to make it his day too, he could help cover the costs. He didn't pay, of course, and instead accused me of being petty. The only good part was that his girlfriend reached out privately. She apologized, said she had no idea he was going to do that, and admitted she didn't want their engagement tied to my baby shower anyway. I was grateful she said that, and I told her I'd be more than happy to help plan something special for them later on. That's where the story ends. This one really made me shake my head a bit. The proposal itself was already pushing it, but the way the mum joined in and encouraged it was surprising. It stood out to me how the girlfriend had no clue, and even admitted she didn't want that memory attached to her engagement. The part that caught me most was the invoice. Bold move, but I can see why it felt justified in the heat of the moment. Honestly, it just shows how family events can spiral when boundaries get ignored. This next story is about a man in a doctor's waiting room who faced pushback from a parent after refusing to let a stranger's child play with his gaming console. Earlier today, I had a doctor's appointment and knew there'd probably be a long wait. To pass the time, I brought along my Switch. I was sitting there playing for a while when a dad walked in with his little daughter, who looked maybe around 5 or 6. They sat down on a couch across from me. After a few minutes, the little girl wandered over and sat down in the chair right next to mine. She leaned over to watch my screen, which didn't bother me at first. I thought it was a little strange that her dad didn't seem concerned about her sitting so close to a random guy in a waiting room, but I just kept playing and let her watch. Then things escalated. Out of nowhere, she reached toward my Switch like she was about to grab it. I instinctively pulled it back and looked over at her dad, expecting him to say something, but he just sat there, acting like nothing was happening. That's when I decided to speak up, even though I'm usually pretty shy in situations like that. I called over and said, "Hey, your daughter just tried to grab my game. Can you ask her not to do that, please?" His response completely caught me off guard. He shrugged and said, "Let her play. What's the problem?" It wasn't a request. It was almost like he was scolding me. I didn't know what to say for a second. I mean, I've let my girlfriend's little brother play with my Switch before, but that's different. This was a stranger's kid, and the way she reached for it didn't make me feel like I could trust that it wouldn't get dropped or broken. So I stood my ground. I said, "No, she can watch, but not play." He immediately got annoyed and told me I should let her play because she was bored. He added that I was a grown man and she was just a kid, so I should hand it over to entertain her. At that point, I wasn't interested in debating. I just repeated no, picked up my stuff, and moved to another seat across the room. From there, I ignored them until the nurse finally called me in. Walking into the appointment, I couldn't stop thinking, bruh, I thought people like this only existed in those internet skit videos. That's the end of the story. Man, that's such an uncomfortable situation. What stood out to me is how the dad seemed to just expect someone else to entertain his kid instead of stepping in himself. I can totally picture the awkwardness of pulling your console away and then getting blamed for not sharing. Honestly, the whole "you're a grown man, she's just a kid" line made me laugh a little. It's such a strange argument. Moving seats was probably the smoothest way to shut it down without things escalating further. This next story is about an entitled driver who treated public charging stations like personal parking spots, only to have their routine disrupted in the most inconvenient way. In my city, we have these charging ports for electric cars in public parking lots. Since I can't install a charger at my apartment building, I rely on those stations for my hybrid. When the program first started, the signs just said electric vehicles only. The problem with that setup was pretty obvious. If a gas-powered car parked there, the charger became useless because the cords don't reach far enough. Most of the time, if a gas car blocked the spot, it was simple. Call the police, and they get towed. But then there were these entitled electric car drivers, the kind who think owning a Tesla automatically grants them permanent access to prime parking. They wouldn't even bother plugging in. They didn't need the electricity at all. They just treated it like their personal reserve space. And since their cars technically fit the electric vehicle only rule, there was nothing anyone could do. No tickets, no towing. Just smug entitlement. One morning, I was on my way to one of the charging stations because my app said a spot was open. While waiting at the red light nearby, I watched as a Tesla slipped right into the space. The driver casually stepped out and walked away. No charger plugged in, no intention of charging, just a prime spot wasted. I sat there, frustrated. I couldn't call the police like I could for a gas car. So I waited about 20 minutes, just letting time pass. After that, I picked up my phone and called the yoga studio the guy had walked into. I figured his class had probably started by then. When a woman answered, I told her in this urgent voice, "A person in your class drives a black Tesla. Plates. Blank. There's a tow truck about to hitch up the car for blocking a charging spot. You should let them know right away." She was so grateful, like I'd just saved the day for this stranger. Meanwhile, I was grinning to myself. A few minutes later, the guy came barreling out of the studio, sprinting around the corner to check on his car. Of course, it was totally fine, but the damage was done. His yoga session was disrupted, his car was announced to the whole class, and everyone in that studio now knew him as the guy who had to run out mid-class to deal with his emergency. I took real pride in knowing I hadn't just ruined his peaceful yoga flow. I'd also ensured everyone else in that class silently judged him. After all, who wants their license plate called out in the middle of Downward Dog? Even now, whenever I need a little boost, I like picturing him sitting back down on his mat, fuming and distracted, knowing someone had gotten under his skin. Eventually, the city caught on and updated the signs. Now they all read, "Electric vehicles only while charging." That change was huge, because it meant drivers who parked without plugging in could finally be ticketed. These days, instead of bothering with yoga studios, I just call the cops and let them handle it. And trust me, I do it every single time. Watching entitled people get ticketed isn't quite as funny as ruining yoga, but it's still satisfying. That story wraps up here. The thought of someone's license plate being read out in the middle of a yoga class is just hilarious. The quiet judgment from everyone else probably stuck with him more than any fine ever could. I also like that the city eventually fixed the signs, so the system actually works now. Still, there's something extra funny about the creative way that problem got handled before the rule change. This next story is about a newly married couple trying to merge their finances, only to spark a family conflict when an ex-wife's name still lingered on a shared subscription. I got married a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things we've been working on is combining our finances. That meant combing through all of our subscriptions to cut out any unnecessary overlap and make everything cleaner. While doing that, we discovered something odd. My husband's brother's ex-wife was still on his family Spotify plan. Because of that, there wasn't room for me. The plan itself had been around for about 6 years. My husband set it up back then for himself and his 2 older brothers. A family plan comes with 4 spots, and since each brother took one, the last account was given to the middle brother's wife. At the time, it made perfect sense. Everyone saved money, and back then, I was still in grad school with my own student pricing, so I didn't need to join. My husband was the administrator, so he handled the bill each year, and the others reimbursed him for their share. But a lot has changed. The middle brother got divorced about a year and a half ago. I'm out of school now, and my husband and I are married. On top of that, we realized the ex never paid her share when the plan renewed this year. With all that in mind, we thought it made sense to remove her and add me. It wasn't about the money. We could afford 2 separate subscriptions. It was more about simplifying things and cutting off a tie that no longer made sense. So my husband deactivated her account, added mine, and then sent a message to his middle brother, letting him know so he could pass the word along. We didn't reach out to her directly. During their divorce, things had gotten so volatile that the brother asked all of us not to contact her at all. Communication was supposed to flow through a lawyer-monitored app, and we wanted to respect that boundary. That's when the conflict started. The middle brother was furious. He felt like we were forcing him into another fight with his ex, just so we could save a few dollars. He told us she was bound to be set off by this, and that she deserved to stay on the plan because of how long they had been together. Longer than my husband and I, in fact. I understood why he dreaded telling her, but to me, it didn't seem right for her to keep a permanent spot on the plan, just to avoid uncomfortable conversations. The oldest brother sided with us. He thought it was healthier to make a clean break. She had chosen divorce, and with that came losing the family benefits. From his perspective, it made no sense for her to stay attached, especially now that there were practical reasons for me to take her place. That's where the story ends. That one really stood out because it shows how something as small as a Spotify account can turn into a bigger family issue. It's wild how people can hold on to those little connections even long after a relationship is over. I also thought it was interesting that the oldest brother immediately saw it as a chance to make a clean break, while the middle brother just wanted to avoid the stress. Honestly, the whole situation says more about the lingering tension in that family than the subscription itself. This next story is about a landlord who tried to push out a tenant under false pretenses, only to be paid back in the pettiest way possible on move-out day. Back in the late 90s, I lived in a pretty great little studio apartment. It even had this quirky turret room that gave it a unique charm. It was just me and my cat, and for the most part, it felt like the perfect spot. The only real downside was the landlord. She was difficult right from the start. When I first signed the lease, she didn't make a big deal about my cat. But later, when she came by with the exterminator, she saw him and suddenly demanded I pay a pet deposit. I reminded her she hadn't mentioned it before, but I didn't want drama, so I just went ahead and paid it. I figured that was the end of it. A few months later, she called me out of the blue. She wanted to come by and show a friend the apartment because she was proud of the renovations she had done herself. I didn't see the harm in it, so I agreed. She and her friend came over, walked around, and the friend went on and on about how much she loved the place and the work that had been done. I thought it was harmless, even good for her. Then, just a couple of weeks later, the landlord called again, but this time she told me I had to be out by the end of the month. I was stunned. She tried to claim it was because I never told her about having a cat. I reminded her that not only had we already talked about it, but I had also paid her the pet deposit. She just brushed that off, doubled down, and insisted I was lying. It felt like she was trying to gaslight me. It didn't take long to figure out what was really happening. Word got back from my downstairs neighbor that her so-called friend had fallen in love with the apartment during that visit and needed a new place immediately. The cat excuse was just a cover story to push me out. Luckily, I found an even better apartment in a nicer neighborhood, so I wasn't stuck. But I was still furious at how dishonest she had been. To get a little petty revenge, I decided not to pay the last month's rent until move-out day. And when that day came, I went to the bank and withdrew the exact amount in pennies. About $350 worth. They gave me rolled coins, but I unwrapped them into a couple of heavy grocery bags. I had already moved all my stuff out, so when she came by for the walkthrough and asked for the rent, I just handed her the bags full of loose pennies. Her face turned red instantly. She yelled at me, demanded I count it out, then said she'd make me stay while she went through it. I just shrugged and told her, "Nah, I know how much is there. Call me if it's short." And then I left her standing there with bags of coins. That's where this story finishes. That one actually made me laugh. Paying rent in loose pennies is such a simple but effective way to get under someone's skin. I could just picture her face turning redder and redder as she realized what she was stuck with. It's also kind of funny how quickly the truth came out. Like, the excuse about the cat was flimsy from the start. Honestly, the move to a better apartment feels like the real win, but the pennies were just the cherry on top. This next story is about a teenager who stepped up to stop a drunk driver, only to be punished by the police for breaking curfew in the process. Just last week, I was driving home from a friend's house late at night when I noticed a car ahead of me swerving all over the road. There was nothing in front of them, no obstacles, yet they couldn't stay in their lane. It was so bad that I instantly knew something wasn't right. I pulled out my phone, called the police, and decided to follow them at a safe distance. I didn't want anyone to get hurt. After a while, the police finally caught up with us and pulled the car over. Sure enough, the driver was extremely drunk. They gave him a sobriety test right there, and he failed miserably. The officers arrested him on the spot, and honestly, it felt like I had helped prevent something really dangerous from happening. They even asked me to write a statement and give them my information, so I handed over my license. That's when everything flipped. One of the officers noticed my age and told me I wasn't even supposed to be driving. It was past 11, and that was against the curfew for someone my age. I explained that I would have been home before curfew if I hadn't come across the drunk driver. I also told him that when I called in, dispatch specifically asked me to keep following the car until the police could arrive. But the officer just shook his head and said it didn't matter. He told me, word for word, that even if me driving past curfew had somehow prevented World War III, the law was still the law. He ended up writing me a ticket for being out past curfew. Then he added that if I tried to drive home myself after that, he'd have to give me a second ticket. So I called my parents and they came to pick me up and drive the car home instead. The whole thing felt so unfair. I had just done something that protected other drivers on the road, yet I was the one being punished for it. Now I'm stuck worrying about this ticket. I'm not sure if I'll really have to pay it or if there's some way to fight it. All I know is that I've got to respond to the court soon, and the thought of messing that up has me feeling really anxious. That story wraps up here. That one feels so frustrating. It stood out to me how the same police who relied on the caller to track the drunk driver ended up punishing them right after. It's one of those situations where the technical rule just clashed with common sense. I also can't help but imagine how nerve-wracking it must have been, first watching someone drive so dangerously and then suddenly being the one in trouble. It's one of those stories that leaves you shaking your head at how backwards things can feel sometimes. This next story is about a teenager caught between divorced parents who refused to attend the same events, leading to conflict when he finally asked for both to show up. My parents split when I was really young, around 4 years old. Not long after, both of them remarried. My mom remarried when I was 7, and my dad remarried when I was 8. Ever since they started seeing other people, they stopped showing up to events together. If I had a school play or some kind of performance, they would take turns. One time it would be mom and my stepdad. The next time it would be dad and my stepmom. And this wasn't just a casual arrangement. It was actively encouraged by my stepparents, who really didn't like the idea of my mom and dad being in the same room. Even if they sat on opposite sides and didn't talk, it just wasn't allowed. Growing up, I hated it. I noticed the difference most when it came to my half-siblings. They always had both of their parents cheering them on at events, while I had to settle for just one. Sometimes I was even asked who I wanted there more, like I had to choose which parent mattered to me that day. It was a constant reminder that my family wasn't the same. I used to play piano, a decision pushed by my parents, not something I was ever really into. I had plenty of recitals, and each time I would have loved to have both parents sitting in the audience. Piano wasn't even my passion, it was theirs. So it stung even more to have just one parent watching me perform. Looking back, I think I would have preferred the chaos of running back and forth between them in the same room, rather than sitting there knowing one was always missing. Now, I've been chosen along with 3 other kids to represent my school at a local competition. It feels like a big deal. My parents already started asking me who I want to be there, saying they need to plan ahead to make sure I'm happy with the arrangement. I decided to finally be honest with them. I told them I want both of them, not one, not just whoever's turn it is. I want both my mom and my dad sitting there to support me. Their reaction wasn't great. They tried to argue that I'd still have 2 people there, like mom and stepdad or dad and stepmom, and that should be enough. But I told them straight up that it's not the same. I want my 2 actual parents there at the same time. That's what matters to me. My honesty hasn't gone over well. Both of my step-parents are upset with my answer, and my parents are acting awkward, like they don't know what to do with the request. And now I'm left wondering if asking for this makes me wrong somehow. That's where the story ends. That one hit kinda heavy. It stood out to me how the step-parents seem to be driving the separation more than the parents themselves. The part about wishing both parents could just sit on opposite sides of the room really stuck. It shows how even something that simple would have felt like a win. It also makes you realize how different the experience can be for siblings in the same family. Honestly, it's tough to see someone feeling like they have to beg for something that should feel so normal. This next story is about a bride who banned phones at her wedding, only to get upset afterward when nobody posted photos online. Last month, I went to a friend's wedding at this beautiful vineyard. The setting was gorgeous, the ceremony was heartfelt, and the food was amazing. Everything felt calm and intimate, and the whole atmosphere was exactly the kind of relaxed celebration people dream about, at least at first. Before the big day, the bride had been very clear about her wishes, on the invitations, in the reminders, even on little signs at the venue. She had written in all caps, "Please, no photos or videos on social media. We want an intimate day without phones in the air." She wanted everyone to be present in the moment, and honestly, I thought that was a great idea. Guests respected it too. Even members of the bridal party kept gently reminding people to keep their phones tucked away. It was refreshing, to be honest. Without everyone holding up phones, you could really just enjoy watching the ceremony unfold. At the reception, people were actually talking, laughing, and dancing instead of curating Instagram stories. For a while, it felt perfect, but later in the evening, things took a turn. The bride started making little comments, almost joking, but not quite. She said things like, "Wow, no one's sharing anything," and "It's like my wedding didn't even happen." She even asked half seriously if nobody had posted a single story. A few guests just looked around, confused, because she had been so firm about not wanting pictures online. Some people tried to grab quick shots at that point, but a lot of us had left our phones in our hotel rooms, thinking we wouldn't need them. Others just didn't want to go against what she'd asked earlier. It created this weird energy where suddenly it felt like following her rules had somehow disappointed her. A couple of days later, a friend told me the bride admitted she was a little disappointed. She said it hurt that there weren't more candid shots shared, and that it made her feel like her wedding hadn't been important enough for people to post about. But for me, it was hard not to think. If you want a certain vibe, you've got to be consistent. You can't ban photos and then get upset when people listen to you. That's the end of the story. That one made me shake my head a little. It stood out how quickly the mood shifted from everyone feeling relaxed to suddenly being second-guessed for doing exactly what they were told. I get wanting the best of both worlds. An unplugged wedding, but also tons of photos online. But those two things don't really go together. It's kind of funny how her guests ended up feeling guilty when they were actually being respectful. This next story is about a long-distance relationship that hit a breaking point when one partner promised to pick the other up from the airport, only to completely let them down. I'd been in a long-distance relationship for about 5 months with someone I'll call Eric. The distance wasn't easy. Driving would take 12 hours, the train about 7, or I could take a quick 1-hour flight. With Valentine's Day coming up, I booked a flight to go see him so we could finally spend a week together. I was excited, nervous, and really looking forward to it. That morning, as I headed out, I sent him snaps of me getting ready, boarding, and just sharing that excitement. When I messaged him from the airport that I'd see him soon, he didn't reply. I brushed it off, telling myself not to overthink it. Even when I landed and still hadn't heard back, I held on to hope. I kept picturing him waiting outside the arrival's door, maybe smiling, maybe holding out his arms. But when I finally walked through and scanned the crowd, he wasn't there. The disappointment hit me hard. I'd flown only to see him, and I had planned to stay with him. So suddenly, I felt stranded. I called him again and again, and each call went unanswered. Eventually, I found myself sitting in a corner of the airport, crying quietly. I felt embarrassed, rejected, and completely undervalued. After a while, I gave up and decided I wasn't going to waste my time waiting. I headed into the city and ended up at a pub, just sipping tea, trying to figure out what to do next. About an hour later, he finally reached out, not with a phone call, but with a simple message. His excuse was that he had fallen asleep. That crushed me. To me, it wasn't just about being late. It was about not even being worth setting an alarm for. I stayed with him in the end because I couldn't afford a hotel or to change my flight. But while I was there, I realized the truth. He hadn't been exhausted or overwhelmed. He had been staying up all night playing video games. When I got back home, I decided I couldn't stay with someone who treated me like that. I ended things. At the time, he didn't fight it. He seemed to accept it. But now, weeks later, he's sent me this dramatic love letter, saying he's sorry, that he loves me, and that he doesn't want to lose me. And here I am, wondering if I overreacted. Was I wrong to break up with him over missing the airport pickup? Or was I justified in feeling so hurt by it? That story ends there. That one honestly made me feel for her. The part that stood out was how much effort went into planning that trip, only to be met with silence at the airport. I can't imagine how lonely it must have felt to sit there and realize no one was coming. The detail about him staying up late gaming made it even tougher to hear. It wasn't just a mistake. It showed where his priorities were. The love letter afterward almost feels too little, too late. This next story is about a wedding guest with serious dietary restrictions who quietly brought her own food, only to be accused of embarrassing the couple. I went to one of my college friends' weddings last weekend, and I was genuinely excited to be there. She's a good friend, and I wanted to celebrate with her. But I have a medical condition that makes it impossible for me to eat certain common ingredients, specifically gluten and dairy. It's not a diet choice or a preference. If I eat them, I get very sick. On the RSVP card, there was a section asking about dietary restrictions. I wrote mine down clearly. A little later, the bride let me know that the venue couldn't guarantee anything completely gluten or dairy-free because of cross-contamination. She tried to reassure me by saying she hoped I'd make do with the salad and fruit. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so I decided to just handle it quietly myself. I packed a small container with grilled chicken and rice, something simple and safe. At the reception, when dinner was served, I slipped outside for just 5 minutes, ate my food quickly, and came right back in. I didn't bring anything smelly. I didn't sit at the table eating my own dish, and I wasn't trying to draw attention. My goal was just to enjoy the night without getting sick. Unfortunately, it didn't stay under the radar. The groom's mother spotted me outside with a container, and apparently, she told a bunch of people that I was disrespecting the caterer and making the couple look cheap. Later in the evening, she confronted me directly. She said I was embarrassing the family, and that if I couldn't eat what was served, I should have just eaten beforehand instead of bringing my own. I tried to explain that it wasn't about being picky. It was about not fainting or ending up sick in the bathroom during the wedding. She rolled her eyes and said I was being selfish, reminding me that the wedding was about the couple, not about your diet. To make things worse, a few mutual friends agreed with her, saying it looked bad that I brought outside food. I honestly didn't think I was causing any harm. I thought I'd handled it as discreetly as possible, but now I can't help second-guessing myself. Did I cross a line by bringing my own food to the wedding? That's where the story ends. That one stood out because of how low-key she tried to keep it. Eating outside for 5 minutes with plain chicken and rice doesn't exactly scream making a scene. What surprised me most was how quickly it turned into gossip. The groom's mom spreading it around made it way bigger than it needed to be. It's interesting how people can twist something practical and private into an insult when really it was just someone trying to get through the night without getting sick. This next story is about a hotel guest who refused to deal with a manager on duty because he wanted a man in charge, and the situation spun into a quiet showdown over respect and authority. I was acting general manager at my hotel while my boss was out on medical leave. The lobby that morning had the usual hum: soft music, suitcases wheeling over tile, the coffee machine hissing in short bursts. I'd already handled a plumbing request, comped a breakfast, and scheduled a late checkout. Pretty normal start. Then a guest stormed up to the desk with quick, heavy steps. He didn't greet me. He just slapped a folded folio on the counter and said he needed to talk to a manager. I smiled and told him I was the manager on duty and I could help. He didn't even try to hide the frown. He shook his head and said he wanted a man in charge. That wasn't the first time I'd heard something like that, but it still landed with that dull thud in my chest. I kept my tone calm. I explained again that I was the manager on duty and could resolve whatever wasn't working for him. He crossed his arms and said his room smelled weird, the AC didn't sound right, and the nightly rate was not what he agreed to. He wanted a full refund for all nights, immediately. At first, I walked him through each concern. Housekeeping had documented that the room was inspected before arrival. We could absolutely move him, and our maintenance tech could check the AC within minutes. As for the rate, I pulled up his reservation and showed him the confirmation. The rate matched his email. I offered a modest adjustment for the inconvenience, a reasonable amount that would cover the hassle without breaking policy. He leaned in and said, low and flat, that he wasn't going to negotiate with me. He repeated that he wanted a man in charge, and until then, he wasn't leaving the desk. I could feel a couple of other guests watching. The lobby can get echoey when voices rise, so I kept mine soft and steady. I offered him water and invited him to step aside for a moment while I printed the maintenance ticket so other guests could be helped. He refused. He planted himself there like part of the furniture. Looking back on it now, what helped was sticking to the process. I printed the ticket. I called maintenance on the back line. I simultaneously rebooked him into a different room on a higher floor. Quiet side of the building, away from the elevator, easy win. Then I pulled out a small form we use for rate disputes and set it on the counter. I told him I would note his concerns, move him immediately, and apply a courtesy discount. I also explained that abusive or discriminatory behavior towards staff is not acceptable at our property. My voice stayed even. I didn't make a speech, just clear, simple facts. He tried one more time to rattle me. "Get me your boss, a male manager," he said. I told him my general manager was out, that I was the acting GM, and that his options were to move rooms with a courtesy adjustment or keep the original room with maintenance on the way. He stared at me for a long moment, like he was deciding whether to escalate. The lobby was quiet, except for the soft ring of the front door, opening and closing. After a while, he huffed and said he'd try the other room, but this isn't over. I handed him the new keys and the little paper sleeve with the room number. I also handed him a copy of the adjustment. He took both, muttered something under his breath, I'm glad I couldn't hear, and walked to the elevators. An hour later, I checked the maintenance board. The tech had inspected the original AC. It was fine, just louder on startup, which happens sometimes. The new room was in perfect shape. I noted everything in his folio and moved on with my day. He came back that evening, quieter and less puffed up. He set the keys on the desk and said the new room was acceptable. That was it. No apology, but the edge was gone. Sometimes the only win you get is the one where the problem stops being a problem. I nodded, wished him a good night, and went back to balancing the shift reports. To give you an idea of how routine it felt by then, the coffee machine hissed again like a little exhale, and the lobby hum picked right back up. That's the end of this story. What stuck with me here is how steady calm can outlast a loud demand. The room change and tiny adjustment weren't flashy, but they were the right levers. I like that there wasn't a victory lap, just a quiet return to normal. Moments like this remind me that clarity beats volume every time. I'm also glad the line got drawn about respect without turning it into a speech. Feels like the kind of win you only notice because nothing else goes wrong afterward. This next story is about being mistaken for an employee while fixing a machine, getting hassled nonstop, and then having someone escalate by calling the police over nothing. I stopped by a big retail store on my way home to fix a vending-style machine I maintain as a contractor. I don't wear a store uniform, just my company polo, tool tote, and a laminated badge with my logo. The machine was right near the front, close enough to hear carts clatter and the doors whoosh every time they opened. The problem was simple on paper. The bill acceptor kept rejecting currency. I powered down the unit, opened the side panel, and started through the checklist. Clear dust, reset sensor, reseat harness. While I'm working, a shopper comes up and asks where to find a specific brand of detergent. I smiled and told them I don't work there, then pointed toward the aisle signs. They thanked me and moved on. No big deal. But 5 minutes later, another person tapped my shoulder and asked me to open a locked case in electronics. I gave the same gentle line. Contractor, not store staff. And still, the taps kept coming. Every few minutes, a new request. Price checks, returns, bathroom directions. It was like the tool tote acted as a magnet. At first, I didn't mind. You help when you can. After a while, though, it made it hard to focus. Then a floor supervisor showed up. He stood a little too close and asked why I was messing with their property. I introduced myself, gave my company name, showed him the work order number, and pointed to the out-of-order tag on the screen. He looked unconvinced, like he'd already decided I was a problem. He asked if my manager knew I was here. I told him yes. Our dispatcher schedules these visits and coordinates with the store's vendor list. I'd literally checked in at the service desk when I arrived. He left without a word. 2 minutes later, he came back with a second employee who looked annoyed, and both of them told me to wrap it up because I was making customers think staff were available. I tried to keep it light. I explained again that I'm not wearing their colors, that I'd be done soon, and that the machine would be back to earning the store money. The second employee rolled her eyes and walked away. Right after that, a man marched up, said nothing, and started pushing the buttons on the machine while my panel was open. I stepped in front and said I needed space to finish the repair. He jabbed a finger at me and said if I didn't do my job and open a glass case for him, he'd find someone who would. I told him calmly that I wasn't store staff. He sneered, said I was lying, and walked off in the direction of the service desk. 10 minutes later, I got proof of where he went. 2 security staff and the same supervisor approached, arms folded, faces set. One asked for my ID. I handed over my vendor badge and the work order. Another one asked me to leave. I said I would as soon as I reassembled the panel so the machine wasn't exposed. A small crowd formed the way it always does when voices rise just a bit in a store. Then the flashing lights showed up outside. Someone had called the police over a machine repair. I can't describe how surreal it felt. Neon reflections on the floor tiles, that brittle quiet that happens when people stop browsing to stare. I kept my hands visible and my voice even. I explained the situation to the officers. I showed the work order, the check-in note at the service desk, and the company app on my phone showing the ticket and the vendor authorization. One officer peeled off to talk to the service desk. The other stood with me and watched me close the panel calmly. When the first officer came back, his posture changed. He nodded and said we were good. He looked at the supervisor and said something like, "He's authorized to be here." The crowd started to move again. The cartwheels began to clatter. The store went back to its normal rhythm. The supervisor gave a tight smile like he'd bitten a lemon. He mumbled something about confusion and walked away. The man who'd started this whole thing pretended to look at a rack of discounted headphones like he hadn't just called the cavalry. I powered the machine back on, fed a test bill, and listened to the acceptor hum. Perfect. The out-of-order screen cleared. I placed a neat little "thank you for your patience" tag on the bezel and cleaned up my tools. Looking back on it now, the whole thing took maybe 40 minutes. Most of that wasn't the repair. It was the explaining, over and over, that I didn't work there. I left by the same sliding doors I walked in, took a deep breath in the warm air outside, and laughed a little at how wild it was to fix a machine and accidentally become the afternoon's main attraction. That's where the story ends. Being mistaken for staff is common, but calling the police was a wild escalation. I appreciate the way paperwork and patience did the talking. There's something satisfying about that first clean whir when the machine accepts a bill again. The store's background noise coming back is its own little ending. I also like how staying even-keeled made everyone else match the pace. No big confrontation, just facts lined up in a row, until the crowd moved on. Quiet competence has a way of resetting the room. This next story is about a coworker who helped herself to someone else's personal item at work, then demanded more when she liked it. At my office, I keep a few small personal things in my desk. Hand cream, lip balm, a couple of mints. Nothing fancy, but I buy a particular hand cream because it doesn't leave a greasy film. It's the one thing that keeps my hands from cracking in winter. I tuck it in the back of the top drawer and use a little before meetings. One afternoon, I came back from lunch and noticed the drawer slightly open. The hand cream cap was off and sitting sideways. At first I wondered if I had just been rushed earlier. Then my coworker leaned over the cube wall and said, "That cream is amazing." She said it like she'd discovered a new office supply. I felt a tiny jolt. I asked if she'd used it. She said yes, smiled, and added, "You weren't using it." I took a breath. I told her it was mine, that I keep it for personal use, and I'd prefer people not take it. She shrugged and said she'd just grabbed a little bit. She walked off like it wasn't worth discussing. Over the next week, the tube deflated fast. I'd pick it up and it felt lighter. The cap began showing those little half-dried rings from being twisted on with product still in the threads. I started putting it deeper in the drawer, then into my bag. But the habit had formed for her. She'd wander over, poke around for it, and ask where I'd put our cream. I corrected that word gently every time. Not our, mine. To give you an idea of how bold it got, she walked up one morning and held out her hand like a nurse waiting for a tool. "Can I get some?" she asked, not really asking. I told her I didn't have it with me. She rolled her eyes and said, "You're not using it anyway. Your hands look fine." I kept my voice steady. I told her again, "It's mine, and I'm not sharing." She laughed like it was a joke. The turning point came on a Friday. I was wrapping up notes from a call when she marched over and said she'd finished it, meaning my tube, and that I should grab another on my way home. She liked this brand and planned to keep using it. I thought I'd misheard. I asked her to repeat that. She did. Same words, same cheerful tone, like she was placing a coffee order. I told her no. I said it simply. She blinked, surprised. I added that I didn't want people taking things from my desk, that it's a boundary, and that I'd already asked her to stop. She gave me a line I still think about. "If you're not using it at the moment, that means I can." Then she said, "But because I want to keep using it, you need to buy more." It was so upside down that I actually laughed. She didn't. I took the empty tube, tossed it in the trash, and said I'd be keeping my replacement in my bag. She got huffy and said I was being stingy. I let the silence do the work. After a while, she stomped away. On Monday, I set a tiny note inside my desk that said, "Please do not remove personal items." I also put a little lock on the drawer. It wasn't about the cream anymore. It was about the habit. She tried the drawer, rattled it, and then stood there with her hand on her hip. She asked me if I had hidden it. I said I'd locked my personal things because they're personal. She muttered that I was dramatic. Later that week, she brought in a cheap lotion and set it on my desk with a little flourish, like a grand gesture. The bottle was half used. I thanked her for the thought and slid it back across the desk. I said I didn't need it. The conversation ended there. Looking back, the funniest part wasn't even the product. It was the logic loop. You're not using it, so I can. And because I can, you should buy more. Once I stopped engaging with that loop, the pressure evaporated. I kept my own routine, my own cream, in my own bag. And our cube wall went back to being just that. Quiet, neutral, and blessedly boring. That story wraps up here. The mental gymnastics of "you're not using it, so I can" is wild. I'm glad the answer stayed simple. A clear no and a drawer lock. It's not dramatic, but it's strong in a way that lasts. The half-used lotion gift made me laugh. Unintentionally, comic relief. I like how the pressure faded once the back and forth ended. Boundaries can be friendly and firm at the same time. And honestly, the best reward is when the cube wall goes back to being boring. This next story is about an office that ignored the fix everyone had been emailed 3 times, then called tech support in a frenzy when the simplest steps solved everything. I work in tech support for a mid-sized company. A software vendor had pushed a shortcut change overnight, which meant every employee needed to restart so the new login script could swap out the old link. We wrote the guidance clearly. We sent it out 3 times in one day. The subject line even said, "Restart required. App shortcut update." Morning arrived and the queue lit up like a switchboard. The first call was urgent. "The app is broken." I asked if they had restarted their computer since the email. The user paused, then said no, because they were in the middle of something. I kept my tone easy. I explained that the login script runs at startup. Without that, the shortcut points to the old location. They sighed and said they didn't have time. I walked them through it anyway. Save your work, close windows, select restart. The line went quiet. A minute passed. The desktop came back. They double-clicked the icon. It launched perfectly, like a well-oiled latch clicking into place. They said a cheerful thanks and hung up. I took a sip of coffee and answered the next call. Same problem, same solution. After a while, the pattern gets almost musical. Greeting, reassurance, quick explanation, restart, relief. To give you an idea of how widespread it was, we had sent the restart reminder in 3 formats: an email, a chat ping from IT, and a banner in the app itself for anyone who still had it open. The banner literally said, "Please restart so this goes away." Around 10, a manager called and said we needed to escalate to the vendor because the application was down company-wide. I pulled up the monitoring dashboard. Everything was green. I asked if his team had restarted. He said his people were too busy. I offered to jump on a quick call and walk the whole group through it together. He agreed. We opened a group call. I was looking at a grid of faces. I asked everyone to save and restart. A few people immediately closed windows. Others hesitated. I filled the silence with a gentle explanation about login scripts and shortcuts, talked about how the computer loads a small set of instructions each time it boots, and how this particular update just needed that fresh start. Once the first couple came back from restart and confirmed the app worked, the rest followed like dominoes. By 11, the queue slowed down. The banner auto-cleared for most users. The urgent emails eased to a trickle. I documented the incident in our ticketing system with a short summary, resolved by restart per broadcast guidance. I resisted the temptation to add a smiley face. Looking back on it now, the lesson is the same one it's always been. People feel pressure when their tools change, even a tiny bit. They want it fixed without thinking about the steps. That's not laziness. It's just how busy days feel. So I keep the tone calm, the steps simple, and the explanations short enough to fit in a breath. "Please restart" isn't a punchline. It's a little bit of magic if you give it a chance. That story ends there. There's something pretty funny about the restart being the fix every time. People get so busy that they skip the simplest step, even after 3 reminders. I like how the group call played out. Once a couple restarted and saw it work, everyone else finally gave in. The smiley face detail in the ticket made me grin too. That's such a relatable feeling. What really stands out is how calm guidance carried the whole thing. This next story is about a retail employee caught between a pushy customer and a too permissive manager, with a return policy turning into a tug of war. I worked at a store where returns were a sore spot. My manager hated complaints so much that they'd rather take anything back than risk a phone call to corporate. It made the return desk feel like open season. People learned that if they pushed hard enough, the answer would probably be yes. One afternoon, a customer walked up with a small appliance still in the box. The packaging looked tired, like it had lived in a garage for a year. He set it down and said, "I want my money back." I asked for the receipt. He said he didn't keep receipts. I asked for the card used to purchase. He said he'd paid in cash. I scanned the box. It wasn't in our system anymore. The model had been discontinued 2 holiday seasons ago. I kept my tone friendly and walked through the options. Without a receipt, we could do a store credit at the lowest sale price if the item was something we still carried. But because this was discontinued and clearly not purchased yesterday, I couldn't process it. He snapped that he'd bought it here, that it never worked, and that he'd been too busy to bring it back sooner. Then he said the words I've heard 100 times. "Get your manager." I paged my manager and explained the situation in clear notes at the bottom of the screen. The customer stood there, arms wide, like a referee making a call. The manager arrived with that brittle smile that says, "I'm already tired." I laid out the facts. No receipt, discontinued model, outside return window. The manager looked at the customer and asked, "What would make this right?" It was like throwing a lifeline. The customer grabbed it and asked for full cash back. At first I thought my manager would hold the line. They sighed and said, "We typically can't do that." The customer started raising his voice. He said he'd call the police because we were stealing from him by refusing the refund. The word police floated in the air, heavy and unnecessary. I felt the eyes of people in line. My manager's shoulders tightened. Here's the thing. Calling the police over a return doesn't make sense. It's not a crime to follow policy. I kept my voice even and repeated what we could do. Store credit isn't glamorous, but it's something. I also offered to check our other locations for a comparable model, if that would help. He wasn't interested. He wanted cash. Right now. My manager glanced at me, then at the line. I could see the calculation. 10 more minutes of argument or 15 people getting impatient. In the end, the manager chose the path they always chose. They told me to issue a store credit as a one-time exception. The customer smirked like he'd won a game. He took the card, stuffed it into his wallet, and walked out without a thank you. After he left, my manager pulled me aside. They said in a low voice that it's easier to just give it to them when they escalate. I nodded, but it didn't sit right. Policies exist for fairness. When you bend them too far, word gets around. People test the limits on purpose. A week later, the same man came back with another dusty box. He tried the exact same move, right down to mentioning the police. This time, I was ready. I documented everything from his first visit in the notes, including the one-time exception. I paged the manager again. I kept my face neutral. To their credit, the manager read the notes and stood taller. They told the customer we had already made an exception and could not make another. The man sputtered, said he'd never been here before, then realized his bluff had a paper trail. He left in a hurry, pushing through the doors with that same referee stance, but this time without the win. Looking back on it now, that was the day our return desk shifted. It wasn't a revolution. It was a small correction. We still helped people when it made sense. We still made exceptions when doing so was the right thing, but we stopped rewarding threats. It felt better. It felt fair. That's where this story finishes. Return counters feel like a crash course in human behavior. I like how the notes turned into a quiet shield the second time around. It wasn't about winning, just keeping things fair for everyone. The police threat over store credit says a lot without saying much. What works here is that steady tone, policy, options, and no rush to argue. The moment the paper trail spoke, the noise kind of fell away. That small correction at the desk felt bigger than it looked. This next story is about a customer who tried to bulldoze staff with customer service voice, until someone higher up stepped in and turned the whole thing around. I was working a slow afternoon when a man in a suit came in with a return. He had that, business stride. He set a small electronics accessory on the counter and announced that it was defective. No greeting, just that sharp tone people use when they think volume equals correctness. I gave the usual warm start and asked for a receipt. He said, "I don't need one. I'm a loyal customer." I scanned the item. It was flagged as purchased over 90 days ago. Our policy is straightforward. With a receipt, we can help within the window. Without one, we try our best within reason. But this was outside the limit either way. I explained the policy calmly. He cut me off with long, slow syllables, like reading a script, telling me about excellent customer service and how any decent company values loyalty. He leaned in, trying to get me to argue. I didn't. I offered alternatives: manufacturer warranty, a discount on a replacement, or troubleshooting if he wanted to see if it still worked. He said he was going to speak to someone who understands business. He asked for the store manager. I paged my manager, who was helping in the back. While we waited, the man kept talking loudly about standards, integrity, and how companies these days forget who pays their salaries. It drew a small audience because loud voices always do. My manager arrived and repeated what I'd said with the same even tone. The man's voice went up a notch. He said he knew people. He said he'd go above our heads. My manager nodded and pointed to the corporate number on the receipt holder at the counter. The man snapped a picture of it and said he'd call right now. Turns out he did know people, just not in the way he thought. He called, gave his dramatic version of events, and asked for the district lead. What he didn't realize was that the district lead was in a regional meeting at our store, touring departments with an executive visitor. And yes, the person walking the floor with them was our company's CEO doing one of those quiet visits where they listen to staff on a normal day. Timing is everything. The district lead, hearing the call, glanced at our service desk from across the aisle. The executive team drifted over, low-key. My manager, cool as ever, explained the situation calmly to the district lead in person. The man kept up his speech, pointing at me and the counter and the item like props in a play. The CEO asked one question in a soft voice. "What does the policy say?" My manager answered. The CEO nodded. Then they asked the man for his receipt again. He admitted he didn't have it. The CEO listened for a moment longer and then said, still politely, that we were following policy, that the manufacturer could help, and that our staff had offered reasonable alternatives. The way they said it, professional, warm, final, deflated the grandstanding. The man tried to pivot into, "I spend a lot here." The CEO said they appreciated his business and that they want him to stay a customer, which is why clear, consistent policies exist. They thanked him for bringing it forward and said the team had handled it correctly. The district lead thanked us too. Then the executive group drifted away toward the appliances aisle, as if they'd just checked the water pressure. The man's shoulders dropped. He stared at the accessory on the counter. In the quiet that followed, the store felt like it exhaled. I offered again to help him contact the manufacturer or find a decent replacement at a discount. He said he'd think about it. He left without another speech. For the rest of the day, my coworkers gave me little thumbs ups when they passed the desk. Not because he lost, but because we'd kept our footing. It felt good to see that when the policy is fair, the people at the very top back it up. That story stops there. I love how one soft question pulled the plug on the theater. It's cool seeing leadership back the front line without turning it into a scene. The air changing from tense to normal in a single beat is such a relief. I like the offer at the end, too. It kept things human. No gloating, no lecture, just a path that made sense. That kind of support sticks with a team for a long time. Makes the next tough interaction feel a little lighter. This next story is about a customer who tried to bully a server into free food by calling the manager, only to find out the person she threatened was actually the owner. I was at my friend's restaurant late one afternoon, tucked at a corner table where I could peek over to the bar and watch the rhythm of the place. It wasn't busy yet. My friend, he usually runs the floor, was covering a server's station. He had that easygoing pace you get when you've worked a room 1,000 times. A quick joke at one table, a water refill at another, then a smooth pivot back to the bar to check tickets. That's when the pair came in. Think practiced entitlement. The woman led, the man hovered half a step behind. She scanned the room the way someone scans a price tag, like she was already deciding what the experience owed her. My friend greeted them, seated them, and brought menus. Not 2 minutes later, she was tapping the table with one finger and calling him back with that sharp little "excuse me" that isn't a question. From my angle, I heard her escalate fast. She said he'd kept her waiting, that she'd seen him playing games behind the bar. He'd been moving a stack of coasters and laughing with a regular, and that this level of service was unacceptable because she knew the owner. She kept slipping in these sideways insults, nothing you could quote to HR, but each one designed to needle him. I watched my friend take a breath, apologize once, and then try to steer them back to an actual order. It didn't work. She doubled down. "Get me your manager," she said, and then the classic line, drawn out with relish, "I will have you fired." The man with her just looked at the table, like this was a script they'd run before. I could see my friend deciding what to do. He gave a small nod, stepped behind the bar, and spoke quietly to one of the older guys wiping down the back counter. Now, here's the twist. The older guy was the owner. He dresses simple, works alongside everyone, and doesn't make a show of it. He walked over with my friend and stood at the edge of their table, hands folded. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked, neutral tone, zero heat. She switched masks instantly. Sweet voice, soft smile, a story that had clearly been edited for her benefit. According to her, the server had ignored them, rolled his eyes, and then dragged his feet on their drinks. She sprinkled in a few words like "usually" and "excellent" to make it sound like she was a loyal regular. And then she asked for their drinks comped and hinted that the meal should be free too, because she knew the owner. The owner listened, nodded once, and turned to my friend. "Is that what happened?" he asked. My friend started to answer, and she cut him off, voice snapping back to sharp. "Are you calling me a liar?" she said, loud enough to bring glances from two nearby tables. The owner didn't flinch. He just let the silence settle for a second, then looked back at her. "Here's the moment I'll replay in my head anytime someone tries this move," he said calmly. "I am the owner. No drama, no edge. Just the truth dropped on the table like a check presenter." The color in her face changed. Confusion first, then surprise. Then the quick calculation of someone trying to decide whether to keep pushing or back out. He kept going. Same even tone. "You are not a regular here. You are trying to create a scene, so we comp your meal. You will pay for what you've already had, and then you will leave. You are not welcome back." She sputtered. He didn't. He set the number on the table for what they owed, just the drinks at that point. Waited while a 10 slid out of her wallet and nodded toward the door. No raised voice, no speech about respect. Just a firm boundary and a clean exit. They went. The dining room exhaled. After they left, my friend and the owner came by my corner table. Up close, I could see the adrenaline in my friend's hands. The kind that makes your fingers drum even when you're trying to hold still. He laughed then, a quiet one. "People forget," he said, "that owners actually work here." We talked for a minute about how calculated some scams are. The plan isn't to get food, it's to push a server until they slip or give a freebie to make the problem go away. When that doesn't happen, when the manager or owner backs the staff, it's like the scheme loses oxygen. By the dinner rush, the room had its usual hum again. Glasses clinked, cutlery chimed softly. My friend floated between tables with that same steady pace, as if the little storm had never touched down. And in a way, it hadn't. The restaurant kept its shape because the people running it kept theirs. That's where the story ends. That reveal never gets old. The calm "I am the owner" has way more power than a lecture. I like how the response stayed measured the whole time. No shouting match, no long debate, just the line, the bill, and the door. It's also a good reminder of how often staff need backup to hold a boundary. You can feel the whole room relax when leadership sets the tone. The small details, wiping down a counter, moving coasters, really paint the scene. And honestly, the clean exit is the best part. This next story is about a sister who refuses to speak to her sibling's husband, creating a painful rift in the family and leaving everyone unsure how to move forward. I recently got married and had a baby, and for the most part, life has been good, but my younger sister has made things really complicated when it comes to my husband. From the very beginning, she's been distant around him. At first, I thought it was just her personality. She's always been standoffish, doesn't have many friends, and rarely brings anyone home to meet the family. When I first introduced her to my husband years ago, she didn't act openly hostile. She just kept her distance. Before the wedding, I even asked her directly if she had any issues with him, and she told me no, that he seemed nice. I asked her to be my maid of honor, and at the time I thought everything was fine. But then something happened recently that really shook me. My husband went over to my parents' house to drop off some food. My sister lives there with them, He told me when he walked in and greeted her, she immediately told him our parents weren't home and snapped that he should just put the food in the garage, even though they were standing right there in the kitchen. He tried to make small talk, just a casual comment about the weather, and she suddenly blew up. She told him not to talk to her, using harsh words, and stormed out of the room. When he came back and told me what happened, my first thought was whether he had done something wrong. But the whole trip only lasted about 5 minutes, and he swore he hadn't said anything out of line. I called my sister to ask what was going on, and she hung up on me. After bombarding her with messages, she finally replied. She told me she has always hated him, will always hate him, and that her boundary is simple. He is never allowed to talk to her. That floored me. In 7 years together, he's spoken to her maybe 5 times, and it was nothing more than greetings. I asked her directly if he had ever done or said something to make her feel this way, and she admitted he hadn't. She just said she doesn't like him, doesn't need a reason, and doesn't want him around. The problem is, our family is close. My brother and I often drop by my parents' place unannounced. My parents love when we do this, especially now with my baby. They adore their grandson and beg us to bring him over all the time. I told my sister that it was going to be impossible to avoid some interaction, like my husband saying hello in passing, but she wouldn't budge. She said she's tired of having a stranger in her home. I told her I'd try to keep them apart, but that would affect her time with my son. My husband doesn't want our baby spending time with someone who openly hates him, and honestly, I'm uncomfortable with it too. That also means my parents might see their grandchild less, which breaks my heart because they absolutely dote on him. Instead of seeing my side, my sister accused me of playing the victim, of trying to trample her one boundary, and of painting her as the problem. Right now I feel stuck. I don't know if I should push harder for answers, try to keep the peace, or accept that things with her may never get better. That's where this story ends. That one really left me thinking. The part that stood out was how she admitted he'd never done anything, but still insisted she hates him. That makes the whole situation feel so strange. It also struck me how the fallout isn't just between her and him, but now it's spilling over into the baby's relationship with the grandparents. The detail about the mom promising to sit the sister down, only for her to keep dodging the conversation, really shows how stuck the whole family is. It's one of those stories where you just shake your head because there doesn't seem to be a clear way forward. This next story is about a date that fell apart at the last minute, when one person sent an over-the-top breakup text that read more like a dramatic monologue than a simple rejection. I had been talking to this guy for a few weeks. We were the same age, and most of our conversations were just lighthearted and fun. Nerdy stuff like anime, D&D, and just joking around. I didn't know him all that well beyond that, but he seemed like a potential new friend, and I was open to seeing where it might go. I'm Demi, so forming romantic connections usually takes me a long time anyway. After an awkward back and forth trying to figure out when we'd meet again, we finally settled on a second date at the local zoo. I was honestly looking forward to it, but a couple of hours before we were supposed to go, I checked my phone and saw this long, dramatic text waiting for me. It started with, "Hey, I'm going to have to rain check our date. In fact, we're going to have to stop all of our future dates." Okay, fine. That part I could understand. If he had left it at that, I would have said thanks, wished him well, and moved on. But he didn't stop there. He went on to explain that he'd talked with a friend and realized it was wrong to lead me on. He said he liked me but didn't feel right about continuing. Then came the part where he insisted I shouldn't ask him why, because he didn't want to hurt my feelings. From there, the message spiraled into this overly grand goodbye, thanking me for being who I am, calling me one of the smartest and most honest women he'd ever met, and telling me to trust in God and pray in Jesus' name. He even said that if he somehow found out I wasn't doing well after our one date, he'd be angry and scold me. Just when I thought it was done, he added more. He thanked me again, blessed my soul, said goodbye twice, and then tacked on that if I wanted to remain friends, he'd be open to it. At that point, it felt less like a breakup text and more like the script of a melodramatic TV show. I showed the whole thing to my sister, and she joked that if I'd sat through an actual date just to hear that speech in person, she would have totally understood if I had smacked him, figuratively speaking. In the end, I blocked him, but not before sending a shorter message back. I told him I had enjoyed talking with him, but what I valued most in friends is honesty, not excuses about sparing my feelings. I reminded him that I'm autistic and disabled, and I don't need to be treated like I can't handle the truth. I also pointed out how infantilizing his message felt, though I was at least glad he didn't drag me all the way to the zoo just to deliver it. I wrapped it up by saying I'd keep growing, keep building confidence, and that he wouldn't be a part of that journey. Then I added a final little flourish, God bless you, and have fun storming the castle. After that, I hit block. Honestly, the worst part of the whole thing wasn't even him. It was that I was robbed of my zoo day. But no worries, I've already made plans to go with friends who will definitely be better company. That's where this story ends. That text was wild. It read more like a farewell speech from a drama series than a normal message. What stood out the most to me was how much heavier he made something that could have been so simple. The fact that it ended with you missing out on the zoo trip actually made me laugh a little, because that almost feels like the real tragedy here. I like how you turned it around though, sending a calm, honest reply and then planning a zoo day with people who'll actually make it fun. This next story is about a young employee who agreed to house sit for her boss, only to feel pressured when asked if a stranger could stay there too. My boss asked me if I could dog sit for her and her husband while they were on vacation. I'm 21 and they're both in their 50s. I agreed, and part of the deal was staying at their house to take care of everything for almost 2 weeks. At first, I didn't have any issues with the arrangement, but on the very first night after they left, I got a text from her. She asked if I'd mind if a man, someone her husband used to be in a band with, could crash in the basement while I was there. She said I'd barely see him, and that he'd stayed there before whenever he needed a place. She showed me the downstairs area before leaving, and honestly, it wasn't really set up for guests. No bathroom, no real bed, maybe just space for a blow-up mattress. The only way in or out of the basement was through the house, and that door was just around the corner from the bedroom I was staying in. None of the doors had locks, so the thought of sharing the house with a man I'd never met made me uneasy. I hesitated, trying to figure out how to respond politely. Eventually, I said that it wasn't anything personal against him, but I wasn't sure I'd feel comfortable having someone I didn't know staying in the house with me. I added that if it was too hard for him to find another place, I'd try to work something out. She replied that it was fine and that he'd find another arrangement, but her messages after that felt really short. The tone made me feel like she was upset with me, maybe even offended. Now I'm stuck wondering if I overreacted or if I came across as rude. I know it's someone she trusts, but for me it would have been way outside my comfort zone. That story ends there. That one really shows how awkward power dynamics can get. What stood out to me was how she framed it like it was optional, but you could tell there was this unspoken pressure behind it. I think a lot of people would have felt uneasy in that situation, especially being alone in someone else's house. Honestly, the fact that the text turned cold afterwards kind of proves how tricky it was to navigate. This next story is about someone whose controlling mother turned their life upside down after they built a home and family, leaving them no choice but to consider cutting ties completely. For as long as I can remember, my mother has been controlling, impulsive, and downright abusive. Every relationship she's ever had, whether with friends, colleagues, or even my dad, has eventually crumbled because of her behavior. 3 years ago, I got the chance to move to another country for work, and honestly, I took it partly as an escape. It was exciting too, because I get to be closer to extended family and start fresh. Not long after I settled in, my mom visited. She decided she wanted to buy a house nearby so she could move there too. The problem was, she didn't qualify for long-term residency. She ignored everything the lawyers told her, convinced she could get around the laws by sheer force of will. Still, she bought this beautiful beachfront property, even though she could only stay in the country short term. Eventually, she agreed that I could live there, keep it up, and pay the bills while she came and went. Life moved forward. I met my girlfriend, she moved in, and soon after, we found out we were expecting a baby. My mom seemed happy about it and even surprised me by gifting me half the ownership of the house. It was the most generous thing she'd ever done. But last summer, when she came to stay with us for 6 months, everything fell apart. One day, I privately texted her and asked if she could avoid bragging to people about money and properties. I'm a private person, and it made me uncomfortable. She completely lost it. For 2 days straight, she screamed at me, said she was kicking us out, and threatened that we needed to find a new place immediately. She ended up flying back to her country, but not before leaving a note with demands for us to move out. Months later, after our daughter was born, she came back. I wanted to believe she'd mellow out with a grandchild in her life. At first it was tolerable, but soon she was back to being controlling, criticizing how we parented and overstepping at every turn. Then, during the holidays, while visiting my girlfriend's family, she completely imploded. She ignored everyone, tried to monopolize the baby, and then at 4 in the morning, she called me screaming about how much she hated my girlfriend and her family. When I brought her back, she snapped at my girlfriend while she was holding our daughter. I had to step in, get her out of the house, and take her to the train station. A few days later, she locked us out of the home, claimed it as hers, and even had neighbors help keep us out. Nearly all our belongings were still inside, and we ended up crammed into a tiny apartment with our newborn. It's been months of stress, but now I've hired a lawyer and started a forced sale through the courts. I plan to change the locks and take back access, because I can't keep living under her control. At this point, I just want to cut ties permanently. That story wraps up here. That one felt heavy. What really stood out was how quickly generosity flipped into control and chaos. It's tough hearing how much energy it takes just to keep things stable when you're supposed to be enjoying time with your newborn. The part about neighbors siding with her was wild too. Like, they got pulled into the drama without really knowing what was going on. It makes sense why he'd want the clean break, because sometimes there's just no middle ground left. This next story is about a teen standing up for their mom after a store employee tried to belittle her because of her accent. For context, my mom has an accent. She's Asian American, and while her accent is noticeable, it doesn't stop anyone from understanding her. Most people speak with her just fine, but every so often, you'll run into someone who pretends not to understand or talks down to her just because of it. About a year and a half ago, I was 14 and at a store with my mom while she was returning something. She had a question about the product, and at first I had my earbuds in, but I could tell it wasn't going well. My mom was repeating herself calmly and clearly, but the guy behind the counter kept answering with nonsense that had nothing to do with what she was asking. He spoke in this condescending tone, like the way you'd talk to a toddler, and you could feel his irritation. Finally, after dodging her actual question for what felt like forever, he interrupted her mid-sentence, sighed dramatically, and turned to me. He asked if I could translate what he was saying to my mom, as if she didn't understand English. I'd already turned off my music by that point to follow along, and I knew exactly what was going on. He repeated his request, probably thinking I'd happily jump in, but instead I gave him a disgusted look and said firmly, "My mom can understand English perfectly fine." Then I put my earbud back in and looked at my phone, deliberately ignoring him. The reaction was immediate. He looked around nervously because people nearby had been paying attention, and I noticed a couple of his coworkers smirking at his embarrassment. Meanwhile, my mom calmly asked her question again for what had to be the 7th time, and just like that, he suddenly understood her perfectly and gave her the right answer. He tried to backpedal, stammering about how he thought she was asking something else and that he was just trying to help. I didn't even acknowledge him. My mom thanked him politely, and as we walked away, I started talking to her in our native language about him, making sure to throw him a nasty look on the way out. For the record, my mom isn't ashamed of her accent, and neither am I. She sometimes asks me to help translate if she forgets a word or if someone genuinely misunderstands her, and that's never an issue. But moments like this, where someone clearly chooses to belittle her, are the ones that sting. That day, though, it felt good to push back. It felt like standing up not just for her, but for all the little microaggressions we've had to put up with over the years. That's the end of this story. That one honestly made me smile a little, because the way the employee instantly changed his tune once eyes were on him says it all. What stood out most was how calm the mom stayed while the teen handled it in just a few sharp words. The mix of quiet dignity and firm pushback was powerful. I think a lot of people listening probably know exactly what that feels like, and it's kind of satisfying hearing someone finally shut it down. This next story is about a woman who ran into the same man twice in different stores, only for him to hit on her both times as if he didn't even remember the first encounter. A few weeks ago, I was at Staples shopping when a man approached me on my way out. He glanced at my hand, saw my ring, and immediately apologized, saying something like, "Oh, I didn't realize you were married." It was clear he had planned to hit on me. I blushed, awkwardly thanked him, and went on my way. Later, when I got back to the car, I jokingly bragged to my husband about being hit on, and we laughed it off. Fast forward to this morning, I was at Costco, this time by myself. As I walked down one of the aisles, I noticed the exact same man from Staples. We locked eyes for a second, and thinking he recognized me too, I gave him a polite smile and kept moving. But then, when I got to checkout, there he was again. This time, he was just standing there, staring at me. That sinking feeling hit me instantly. I felt uneasy, like something wasn't right. He walked right up and said, "Hi, I never do this, but are you single?" I was shocked. He didn't remember me at all. Didn't remember hitting on me just weeks earlier at Staples. And here he was again, saying the same kind of thing. I kept it simple. I smiled and said, "No, I'm married." He apologized and walked away, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I found myself watching him closely, keeping one eye on him as I made my way to the car. The whole thing just left me creeped out. On one hand, maybe it was just a coincidence, and he's one of those overly confident guys who hits on women everywhere he goes, to the point where he doesn't even remember who he's already approached. But on the other hand, I couldn't help but wonder if it was something more. Like if he had actually followed me before, or if there was something darker going on. Even now, I can't decide if I should just shrug it off or take it as a serious red flag. That's where the story ends. That one definitely gave me chills. What really stood out was how fast the vibe switched from harmless to unsettling, just because of the repeat encounter. It's one thing if someone shoots their shot once, but forgetting he'd already done it and trying again makes the whole thing feel off. The way she described keeping one eye on him out to the car really says it all. That lingering sense of unease is hard to shake. This next story is about a woman whose boyfriend surprised her with a puppy she didn't want, only for her to find out his plan went way deeper than just a birthday gift. I've always had pets, dogs, cats, even birds I rescued and rehomed, but I've never had a male pet. My mom didn't like them because of the whole marking territory thing, and honestly, I just got used to only having girl pets. On top of that, I love using my dogs like pillows, and having a male dog with everything a little too present makes me uncomfortable. I've had my dog, Luna, since I was 17. She's my baby, she rules my life, and she's not friendly with most people. She tolerates my boyfriend of 2 years though, which is saying something. A couple of weeks ago, he told me he had a birthday surprise for me, but it wasn't ready yet. When I came home from work one Friday, he was waiting in my apartment with a German Shepherd puppy, about 2 months old, male, with a balloon tied to his collar that said, "Happy birthday." He grinned and said, "Do you like him? He's our new son." I froze. The first thing I asked was, "Where's Luna?" He had locked my dog in the bathroom because she growled at the puppy. I was furious. We fought for hours. I told him to take the puppy back and not to come back himself. He stormed off, called me a misandrist, and mocked me for being uncomfortable around dog parts. The next day, it only got worse. While I was at work, he brought the puppy back to my apartment without my knowledge, stayed 20 minutes, and left. I found out because my neighbor heard the chaos, used her spare key to check, and called me. Luna was glaring at the puppy like she was deeply offended, and my apartment was trashed. At first I thought it was all the puppy's doing, but the damage didn't look like normal puppy destruction. When I checked building management cameras, there he was, walking in with the puppy, dropping him off, and leaving me to deal with the mess. That was the last straw. I had him removed from my visitor list, and building management offered to change my locks. With help from my godfather, we found a family with experience in large breeds who wanted to adopt the puppy. They named him Kai, and he's in a good home now, with people who know what they're doing. When I confronted my ex, through his mom since I had him blocked, I found out the truth. He admitted he was jealous of Luna. He thought having a German Shepherd would make me realize Luna wasn't manly enough, and that 2 dogs would be too much work. His plan was that I'd give Luna up and finally see reason. His own mom told him she was disappointed in him, and I ended things right there. Since then, I've talked it through with my therapist and psychiatrist, and both said the same thing. There's nothing wrong with having preferences as long as animals aren't harmed. Luna's still my one and only, and Kai has a new home. As for my ex, he's out of my life for good. That's where the story ends. That story was wild. The part that really stuck out was the boyfriend's plan to basically replace Luna. Like, that's not just thoughtless, that's manipulative. The detail about him sneaking back into the apartment with the puppy was unsettling too, because it showed how little respect he had for boundaries. At least the ending feels lighter, knowing Luna stayed right where she belongs, and the puppy found a loving home. Honestly, the ex being gone might have been the best gift of all. This next story is about a new mom whose first Mother's Day was completely derailed by her husband giving in to his mother's demands. Our little boy is turning 1 later this summer, which means this year was both my very first Mother's Day and my husband's first Father's Day. When my husband asked me what I wanted for mine, I kept it simple. Nothing fancy or expensive. Just a morning where he got up with the baby so I could relax and pump in peace. Breakfast in bed, some toast, scrambled eggs, and coffee. And then a trip to the zoo for our son's very first visit. Later, I wanted to grab dinner at my favorite taco place. That was it. To make things fair, the weekend before Mother's Day, I arranged separate brunches for both my mom and my mother-in-law. I bought each of them flowers and thoughtful little gifts, and I let everyone know in a group chat that the actual holiday would be just for me, my husband, and our little family. I thought everything was clear, but the night before Mother's Day, my husband's mom called him. His dad had just had 300 bags of mulch delivered, and she said he needed help moving them. She claimed it wouldn't take long, just a couple of hours in the morning before we went to the zoo. I told my husband it felt like a setup, that his mom was trying to pull him away from our plans, but he brushed it off, saying it wasn't a big deal. The next morning, instead of breakfast in bed, I was the one up feeding our son because my husband had gone to his parents' house. I texted him when the baby went down for a nap, reminding him to start wrapping things up, but by the time our son woke up 2 hours later, my husband still wasn't home. He called to say it was taking longer than he thought, but that he'd leave soon. Another hour passed, and at that point, we had completely missed the zoo window. I told him not to bother, that he'd already ruined the day, and to just stay there and finish. Later, my mother-in-law actually called me and suggested I bring the baby over to spend time with her since the boys were still working on the mulch. I told her flat out that I had no interest in spending my first Mother's Day with the people who ruined it. So instead, I stayed home, ordered pizza, and binged Netflix. When my husband got back, he apologized over and over, asking how he could make it up to me. I told him he couldn't, because the point wasn't about gifts or food. It was about the one day I asked to be prioritized, and he chose his mom instead. So when Father's Day rolled around, I told him I'd be spending it with my family. He ended up coming along, and we had a nice day with my parents. But his mom still sent me a snippy text about how hurtful it was. I reminded her she already got to spend Mother's Day with her son. At the end of the day, I'm just tired. It's not even about the holiday anymore. It's about my husband never being able to set boundaries with his mom, and me being left to deal with the fallout. That's where this story finishes. What stood out most was how much thought she put into celebrating everyone else first, only to have her own day sidelined. The mulch thing was almost cartoonish, like the worst kind of excuse dressed up as an emergency. And the way the husband kept saying it wouldn't be a big deal, only for it to eat up the entire day, really showed where his priorities were leaning. The part that stuck with me most was her just sitting at home with pizza, because it perfectly captured that mix of disappointment and exhaustion. This next story is about a kid who had been bullied for months after recovering from major surgery, until the day he finally decided to fight back. My son was born with a condition called pectus excavatum, which meant his chest was sunken in. His case was so severe that there was barely a couple inches between his sternum and his spine, and both his heart and lungs were actually bruised from the pressure. Last December, he had to undergo surgery, where doctors placed 2 nickel bars in his chest to create space and help his bones grow the right way. A few weeks into recovery, another kid punched him and dislodged one of the bars, which meant he had to go through a second surgery just to fix the damage. Needless to say, my son has been through a lot. After months of healing, his doctor finally cleared him for most normal activities, not contact sports, biking, or skateboarding yet, but enough that he could carry his backpack, hang out with friends, and start living a little more normally. That same evening, he came to me and said something I wasn't expecting. "Dad, I'm cleared now. A kid has been bullying me and hitting me for months. Can I kick his ass?" He's never been the kind of kid to fight. Sure, he wrestled with his brothers like siblings do, but against anyone else, he'd always lost. At first I thought he was just venting, but I could see how serious he was. I hadn't even known he'd been dealing with bullying all semester. He was so distressed about it that I told him straight up, "If he hits you again, knock him out." He nodded, quiet but determined, and went to his room. Now, his older brother, tough as nails, is in the same grade after missing a year from a brain injury. They even share a class. I asked him about it, and he admitted that the bully had been hitting my younger son every single day when he walked into class. He told me he didn't step in because he thought his brother needed to toughen up and would fight back when he was ready. I told him to watch out for him, but not to get himself in trouble. The very next morning, I dropped them at school and headed off to take my younger daughter to her later start time. On the drive, my wife called. She said, "After you take her, go pick up your son. He got in a fight." I figured it was my older one, but when I walked into the office, it was my younger son, grinning from ear to ear. He pointed across the room at another kid holding an ice pack to his face. "I warned him," he said. Turns out the bully walked into class like usual, punched him in the head, and before his older brother could even move to stop it, my son stood up and floored the kid with a single punch. He said the kid started bawling on the floor and told me it was the best day of his life. He did get suspended for 3 days, but honestly, he couldn't have looked prouder. That's the end of this story. That was honestly kind of satisfying to hear. The part that stood out was how much the kid had been holding it in, and then when he finally snapped, it only took one punch to shut the whole thing down. I also couldn't help but laugh at how he was grinning in the office like it was a trophy moment. It's not often you hear about a suspension being someone's best day ever, but in this case, I can see why he felt that way. This next story is about a kitchen mishap that turned into absolute chaos when hot dog water ended up all over the family dog. Whenever I cook hot dogs, I've always had a system. I slice the package open, take a couple out, then roll the rest back into the plastic and keep it secure with an elastic band. It's not fancy, but it works. For some reason, though, this time I didn't do that. Instead, I just folded the plastic over a few times and tossed it back on the shelf, figuring it would be fine. A little while later, my spouse rushed into the kitchen. They had a small break between their back-to-back meetings and wanted to throw together a quick lunch. Now, in our home, it's just the two of us and our little rescue dog. And this dog, he's a world-class beggar. He'll weave between your legs like a pro, eyes locked on the floor, acting like he hasn't been fed a single meal in his entire life. So there we all were in the kitchen. I heard the fridge open, and that's when it hit me. With a sinking feeling, I realized exactly what was about to happen. My spouse was definitely reaching for those hot dogs, the ones I had wrapped up in the laziest way possible. I spun around, ready to warn them, but it was too late. My spouse was standing there, staring at me wide-eyed as the hot dog package unrolled in slow motion, just like one of those fruit by the foot commercials. Only instead of candy, it dumped an unreasonable flood of hot dog water, right onto our dog's head. That was it. Our dog absolutely lost his mind. He bolted across the apartment like it was the second coming, zooming from room to room with more energy than I've ever seen in his life. He was howling, rolling across the furniture, flinging hot dog water everywhere. I mean, literally every single piece of furniture got blessed with a smell. Meanwhile, I'm standing there realizing the damage. I don't even hate hot dogs, but the smell is so strong, it clings to everything. Every time I tried sitting down, all I could smell was hot dog juice. My dog, on the other hand, thought it was the best day of his life. He looked at us like we had just handed him a golden ticket. And now, I'm just trying to figure out how to shampoo hot dog water out of my entire apartment. That's where this story ends. That was hilarious, like something straight out of a comedy skit. The way the package unraveled in slow motion and dumped all over the dog had me picturing it perfectly. I couldn't help but laugh at how the dog thought it was the greatest blessing ever, while the humans were left stuck with the smell. Honestly, I think what makes it even funnier is that it all happened because of one tiny break in routine. This next story is about someone who thought they were dodging trouble when their phone lit up with US Gov on caller ID, only to realize they had just declined a call from a friend aboard the International Space Station. Just a couple of days ago, I was in the middle of hanging out with some people when my iPhone lit up with an incoming call. The screen said, US Governor. You know that feeling when you were in school and suddenly got called into the principal's office? That wave of panic hit me instantly. My first thought was, crap, what did I do that I thought I got away with, but maybe I didn't? I showed everyone the caller ID. and the room lit up with warnings. People were saying, "Don't answer it," and I could feel my gut telling me to ignore it too. So I hesitated, thought better of it, and sent the call to voicemail. A minute later, I found out I had just made a huge mistake. That wasn't some random government call. It was my friend, who happens to be on his second mission aboard the International Space Station, calling me from orbit. The voicemail started off with him laughing, saying, "You probably saw a call from US Gov and turned it down." And he was right. I had the chance to talk to someone who wasn't even on Earth, and I blew it. Thankfully, he called again the next night. That second call? Absolutely incredible. We talked for about 12 minutes. I asked him where he was flying over at that moment, and he said the western coast of Africa. He described the ride up, how the second stage acceleration hit over 4 Gs. Then suddenly they were slammed into their straps when the engines cut off. And just like that, orbit. He said the whole climb took about 8.5 minutes. It was mind-blowing just to hear him describe it firsthand. We also joked around a bit. Ironically, I had made us both laser-engraved rocks glasses before the launch, and I happened to be drinking from mine when he called. He cracked up about me missing his first call and said it happens more often than people think. The call ended when they had to switch satellites, but for those 12 minutes, I was talking to a friend from space. That's the end of this story. That was such a cool one to hear. I mean, missing the first call is funny enough on its own, but the fact that they got a second chance to actually talk with someone orbiting the planet is wild. The details about the launch, those 4 Gs, and then suddenly being weightless really stuck with me. I also like how casual and funny it was. Like, even astronauts still laugh about missed calls and inside jokes. This next story is about a family that fell apart after a DNA test revealed shocking results about hidden relationships and long-buried secrets. With all the hype around DNA testing, my dad and I decided to give it a try. We ordered kits from one of those companies, sent them in, and when the results came back, I was curious to look at the relatives section. That's where everything started to unravel. At the top of my matches, my dad was listed as only sharing about 29% of my DNA, with the prediction that he was my half-brother. That didn't make sense to me at all. We looked so much alike, and we even shared a paternal haplogroup. On top of that, my cousin, who had taken the test a while back, came up as sharing almost 25% of my DNA, with the system predicting her to be my half-sibling instead of just my cousin. For reference, first cousins usually share around 12%. I couldn't wrap my head around what I was seeing, so I posted online for help. The feedback I got was pretty clear. The percentages on these tests are extremely accurate. The only logical explanation was brutal. My uncle, my dad's brother, was actually my biological father. When that realization hit me, I felt like I'd been knocked over by a freight train. At first it was pure shock, then anger bubbled up, and I needed answers immediately. I stormed downstairs and confronted my mom. She had just gotten home from one of her business trips and had no idea that my dad and I had even taken the test. I didn't ease into it. I flat out asked if she had cheated on Dad with Uncle David. I'll never forget how quickly the color drained from her face. She tried to brush it off, mumbling something about what a ridiculous question it was. But I laid out all the evidence. The test results, the DNA matches, everything. That's when she broke. She collapsed to the floor crying, begging me not to tell my dad. I couldn't handle it. I left her there, went back to my room, and called my cousin, who was now technically my half-sister. She didn't take it well either, screaming before hanging up. Not long after, my dad came home. He noticed something was wrong immediately and asked why Mom was falling apart. I told him everything too. He went completely silent, then left the room. From behind my locked door, I listened to hours of chaos unfold in my house, shouting matches, sobbing, grandparents rushing over, my uncle showing up, and what sounded like a physical fight breaking out between him and my dad. By the end, the house was filled with silence, broken only by my mom sobbing. My dad was gone, and I stayed locked in my room, terrified of what was happening outside. It felt like my entire family had imploded in the span of one night, all because of a test kit I bought with my birthday money. That's where this story ends. That one was heavy. It's wild how something as simple as a DNA kit can dig up secrets that completely change people's lives. I can't imagine being in that room, hearing the whole house fall apart outside the door. What stuck out to me most was how quickly everything spiraled. from curiosity about family matches to absolute chaos in just a few hours. Sometimes the truth feels like a relief, but in cases like this, it's almost too much to take in at once. This next story is about a first date that went completely off the rails when someone brought along a very unexpected guest. Like a lot of people stuck in the world of modern dating, I had turned to Tinder. After chatting with this guy for a few days, everything seemed promising. We had plenty in common, the conversations flowed easily, and on paper it felt like we were looking for the same things. His pictures looked nice enough, and he didn't even live too far away. It felt like it could be worth meeting in person. So I invited him over for something simple, just grilling burgers in my backyard. He asked if he could bring anything, and I told him to grab some bacon for the burgers. He agreed, and I figured he'd be at my place in about 15 minutes given the distance. I started the grill, seasoned the patties, and got everything ready. But 30 minutes later, I got a message from him saying, "I've driven by a couple times and chickened out. Are you sure you want me to come over?" I figured maybe he was just nervous, so I told him to come on by because, honestly, I was hungry. When he finally showed up, the difference between expectation and reality was immediate. His photos had given more of a Cedric Diggory kind of vibe, but the man walking up looked a lot more like Hagrid. Still, I brushed that aside. From the moment he opened his mouth, though, he just didn't stop. Within the first 5 minutes, I had learned his entire life story, from drama with his aunt and grandma to the fact that his dad collected taxidermy. He talked without a single pause, barely taking a breath. Trying to stay patient, I got the burgers off the grill, and that's when he pulled a Ziploc bag out of his pocket. Inside were exactly 2 slices of bacon, which he placed carefully on his own burger, and only his. I tried to ignore how odd that was, sat down at the patio table, and started eating. I had finished my burger before he even started his, because he was still going on about his stories. Then things got truly strange. He reached into his pocket again and pulled out a tiny vial, about 2 inches tall with a cork stopper. Inside was a grayish powder. I stared at it, torn between thinking he was about to snort something weird or pull off some arts and crafts project. He noticed me looking and said, completely casual, "Oh, I'd like to introduce you to my mother." It turned out the vial held some of his mom's ashes. He explained that he brings her along to important events, and he wasn't exaggerating. He also had ashes sealed in a necklace, in a ring, and even had a half-sleeve tattoo dedicated to her. I've lost people myself, and I understand that grief looks different for everyone. But watching a vial of his mom's ashes sitting on the patio table during our very first date was more than I could handle. When he finally finished his burger, I made up an excuse about needing to finish some work. At 9:30 at night. He texted me before he even reached his car to say, "My mother really liked you. I can't wait to see you again." That's when I told him I didn't feel a connection with him or his mother. That's the end of this story. That one had me wide-eyed the whole way through. It started off awkward, but the moment he set that vial down on the table, it went from strange to unforgettable. What stuck with me was how casually he revealed it. Like it was just another normal part of dinner conversation. I get that people find comfort in different ways, but pulling out ashes on a first date? That's a level of intensity no one is ready for. Honestly, I can't blame the storyteller for bailing out after that. This next story is about a player who worked non-stop to get better at a game, only to discover that their improvement ended up driving away the very person they had a crush on. Back when I used to play this MMO with a group of friends, I was the one most into PvP, even though I wasn't very good at it. Then one day, a new guy joined us. Well, not exactly new. He had played before, but had taken a few years off. The moment he showed up, everyone started hyping him up like he was some sort of legend. They talked about how he used to be one of the top players, how his skills were so sharp people thought he was a bot, and how he could dominate just about anyone in a one-on-one. I'll admit it, I developed this awkward crush on him almost instantly. So when he heard I liked PvP, he challenged me to a duel and absolutely destroyed me. Afterward, he gave me these long-winded, condescending lessons about how to improve. And because I had this dumb crush, I soaked it up like it was the best thing ever. His idea of teaching was basically wiping the floor with me over and over again, but I didn't complain. After a few days, though, he lost interest and stopped giving me attention. I was embarrassed about how bad I was. And I thought if I worked hard enough and impressed him, maybe he'd start playing with me again. So I threw myself into it. I practiced 6 hours a day on weekdays and 10 plus on weekends. I even lost weight because I barely ate. I just played, studied builds, and researched strategies nonstop. Almost 10 months later, I had gotten ridiculously good. I finally managed to talk him into a duel again, mostly as a joke, and to his surprise, I beat him. He thought it was a fluke and demanded a rematch, but I won again. That's when he got mad. He switched his build to perfectly counter mine and finally beat me, but instead of feeling crushed, I was thrilled. It turned into this back and forth where we kept adjusting and countering each other. For me, it was the most fun I'd ever had in the game. I was finally showing him how much I'd improved, and I thought he was into it too. Turns out, on his side of the screen, he was fuming. He got angrier and angrier, until finally he said he was done, logged off, and just never came back. I thought maybe he was busy with work or real life, but later I found out he'd actually quit because of losing to me. At our next real life hangout, he barely spoke to me, then made these pointed comments about how he didn't like girls being into gaming as much as he was, saying girls who were too into it were basically guys. That's when it finally hit me. He wasn't just annoyed, he was furious that I beat him. He never returned to the game while I was still playing. Then, years later, after I finally quit, a mutual friend told me that's when he decided to start playing again. That story wraps up here. That one had me shaking my head. It's wild how much work went into leveling up just for someone who couldn't handle losing. What stood out was how different the experiences were. You thought it was fun back and forth competition, and he saw it as this personal blow to his pride. Honestly, it's kind of funny that he waited until you quit before coming back. Like the game wasn't safe until then. It's one of those stories where you almost feel bad for laughing, but the irony is just too strong. This next story is about a hotel guest who secretly fixed the entire network, leaving the staff torn between being grateful and realizing how unprepared they were. I work at a quirky little boutique hotel downtown, just 35 rooms, nothing huge. Last week we had a guest check-in who seemed completely ordinary. He was a software engineer from Seattle, in town for a conference, staying 3 nights. Polite, quiet, nothing unusual at all. But then on day 2, something strange happened. Our Wi-Fi, which had been painfully unreliable for months, suddenly started working better than ever. Every device connected instantly. Streaming was smooth. Even our old back office computers, which usually crawled through web pages, were loading faster than I'd ever seen. Our general manager was over the moon, thinking the internet company had finally sorted things out. But I was suspicious. In my experience, tech problems don't just magically fix themselves. That evening, while I was working late, the guest came down to the lobby looking a little embarrassed. He admitted that on his first night, he'd gotten frustrated with our slow connection and decided to take a look at our network. By take a look, what he really meant was that he'd accessed our router configuration and completely optimized the entire system. He had reorganized our wireless channels, updated firmware we didn't even know was outdated, and set up quality of service rules so guest devices were prioritized over the back office computers. He even put bandwidth management in place so no single device could hog all the internet. It was impressive and, honestly, a little terrifying. I should have been horrified that a guest had hacked into our system, but the truth was the Wi-Fi had never worked that well before. He walked me through everything he had done, patiently explaining how our original setup was inefficient. He even wrote up a small guide so we could handle basic maintenance ourselves. The best part? He pointed out we were paying for higher speeds than we were actually using, and because of the poor configuration, we weren't getting our money's worth. With his adjustments, our budget package suddenly felt like premium service. Our general manager didn't know how to react. Half grateful, half concerned about security. The guest reassured us that he hadn't touched any private data, only the network performance. He even offered to undo all the changes if we wanted. We definitely didn't want that. Instead, we asked if he'd be willing to take a quick look at our other systems. That's when we found out how unprepared we really were. Our property management software was still using default passwords. Our payment processing had obvious vulnerabilities. Our guest database wasn't even properly encrypted. He spent his last day with us helping fix issues we didn't even know existed. He refused payment, so we comped his stay and gave him a nice bottle of wine. He left behind detailed documentation of all the changes, his contact information in case we had questions, and even recommendations for specialized IT vendors. It opened my eyes to just how much we were running on luck, hoping nothing would break in systems we barely understood. Since then, I've been learning more about networks and cybersecurity, enough to maintain what he set up. Our Wi-Fi is consistently strong now, our systems are actually secure, and I no longer feel like we're one bad click away from disaster. Still, it's a little wild to think the best IT help we've had came from a random guest checking in for a conference. That's where the story ends. That one made me smile because it's such a unique mix of risky and wholesome. The part that stood out was how the guy not only fixed things but also left behind guides and recommendations. Like, he genuinely wanted to help. It's kind of funny that a small hotel was basically running on crossed fingers until a guest just couldn't stand the bad Wi-Fi anymore. Honestly, the fact that they comped his stay and gave him wine feels like the perfect ending. This next story is about someone dealing with a pushy mom who tried to cut in line at the Walmart hot bar during their quick lunch break. I only get about 30 minutes for lunch, and while it isn't strict, I like to keep it quick. Usually, I'll grab something fast and head back to my desk so I can eat comfortably. On this particular day, I decided to swing by Walmart because the hot bar is cheap and close to work. When I walked up, there was nobody behind the counter, which wasn't surprising since they're almost always short-staffed. I stood there waiting quietly for a couple of minutes, when suddenly 3 kids came running up from the grocery section. They were yelling, pointing at the food, and even pressing their noses against the glass. A moment later, their mom strolled over, still talking loudly on her phone, and planted herself right next to me, uncomfortably close. By now, I had already been waiting about 5 or 6 minutes, when the employee finally came out from the back. She looked at both of us and asked who she could help. I opened my mouth to order, but before I could even get the words out, the mom jumped in and started rattling off her order like she had been standing there the whole time. I immediately cut her off and told her, "No, I was here first, and I'm in a rush." The look on her face was priceless, like one of those shocked cartoon expressions where her jaw practically hit the floor. She muttered something I didn't even bother catching, because I went right ahead, placed my order, and walked away with my food. Normally, I'm not the confrontational type, but I wasn't about to stand there and let her take over just because she felt entitled to cut ahead, especially when she clearly had plenty of time to wander around the store and was ordering for multiple people. That's the end of this story. What stood out here is how bold some people can be when they think no one's going to say anything. The mom was so confident she could just slide in like you weren't even there. Honestly, I like that you didn't make a big scene. You just shut it down quickly and kept it moving. And the way you described her reaction made me laugh, because you could tell she wasn't used to being called out like that. Sometimes it's those little moments of standing your ground that stick with you the most. This next story is about a student who walked out of their sculpture class after clashing with a professor who insisted their project was wrong, even though it followed the assignment guidelines. I've always been a textile artist at heart, but because my university merged degree programs, I ended up in a sculpture track. I already hold a degree in ceramic sculpture, and I've taught on and off for years, so this wasn't my first experience with the art world. The class I was taking was focused on wood and metalworking, and it was taught by a grad student. For context, I'm also trans and autistic, and those perspectives naturally shape the way I create art. Our very first assignment was to build a reliquary out of wood. That was the only instruction. No extra rules, no limits. Just make a reliquary out of the provided wood panel, which was basically compressed sawdust. To me, that kind of freedom is exciting. I wanted to push boundaries and create something symbolic. My concept was a phoenix that would hold my old passport in its beak, meant to be burned later. The burning represented leaving my old life behind, my past identity, my attempts to move countries, and my evolution as an artist. The phoenix is the old me. The new me exists outside of it. I even made a cardboard prototype over the weekend, layering pieces together since the wood wasn't carvable, and planned to hinge the wings so it would have depth and motion. When I presented the idea, I actually got positive feedback, and I started sketching the design onto the wood. But then my instructor came over and began picking apart my concept. He implied I was doing it incorrectly, and might get a lower grade. He kept saying it wasn't 3D enough, even though it was layered sculpture. Then he questioned why I chose my passport instead of some childhood object, and even asked, out of nowhere, where the baby phoenix was. I had to explain that I was the new life, not some literal baby bird. We went back and forth for a while, but I brushed it off and kept going. The next class, I was finalizing my sketches, and he came back with the same line of questioning. Again, he insisted it wasn't a real sculpture, even though relief work is a valid form of sculpture. At that point, I was frustrated. We had no restrictions other than the material, and I was tired of defending my work. He just stood there staring at me, and I realized I wasn't going to get anywhere. So I packed up my things, walked out, and officially dropped the class a few minutes later. I know it might seem extreme, but for me, art isn't about ticking off arbitrary boxes. It's about expressing something real. If he wanted a very specific kind of sculpture, then he should have just said that from the start instead of pretending it was open-ended. That's where this story ends. What really jumps out to me here is how the professor kept moving the goalposts. You were given an open prompt, and instead of respecting your interpretation, he wanted it to fit into his box. The whole "where's the baby" thing especially feels like he just wasn't listening. Honestly, walking out makes sense. Sometimes you've got to protect your creative energy instead of letting someone chip away at it. And the fact that you already had a clear vision makes the whole clash feel even more frustrating. I get why you didn't want to compromise just for a grade. This next story is about a woman dealing with years of mistreatment from her mother-in-law, while her husband refuses to stand up for her. I've been married for quite a while now, and for the most part, things are good these days. But that hasn't always been the case. A huge part of the problem has been my mother-in-law, and honestly, the way my husband reacts, or really doesn't react, to her behavior. Over time, I've just learned to ignore her for the sake of my own sanity, but recently she pushed me too far. My father-in-law hurt his back not long ago, and since I also deal with chronic back problems, I tried talking to him about different ways to find relief. Eventually, he had an MRI done and ended up with the same diagnosis as me. While I was explaining that to him, my mother-in-law suddenly cut in and said, "I told you years ago that we didn't want to hear about this for the rest of your life." That was the moment I lost it, and here's why. About 15 years ago, my husband and I were in a bad car accident. He had been driving, but I told everyone I was the driver because his job and his entire income depended on keeping his license. I was the one who ended up severely injured. While I was at home recovering, my mother-in-law called me when my husband wasn't around. She spent a solid half hour berating me, telling me I could have killed her son, that I was irresponsible, and basically ripping me apart while I was already in pain and trying to heal. Later, my brother-in-law called to check on me, and I told him what she had said. He confronted her, and after that, she called me back. Not to apologize, but to accuse me of lying and to blame me for not stopping her rant. She even said that my husband probably felt bad about my injuries, and that I'd use that guilt against him for the rest of his life. That was the moment I realized, no matter what I did, she was always going to twist it. And the worst part, my husband never said anything to her. His only response has always been, "That's just how she is." I've spent years waiting for him to step in and say, "Don't talk to my wife like that," or even just ask her to stay out of it. But he never does. He lets her treat me like garbage, and I've had to swallow it over and over. Now that I've finally stood up for myself, my husband's upset with me for not keeping quiet like usual. He expects me to just ignore her behavior forever, but I've decided I can't and won't do that anymore. I refuse to apologize for defending myself, even if it causes waves in the family. That's where this story ends. It's tough hearing how long you've had to put up with that kind of treatment, especially while your husband stood by and did nothing. The part that really stood out was when she twisted your accident into being about her son's feelings instead of your actual injuries. That's such a cold thing to say. Honestly, I don't blame you for finally snapping. It sounds like you've been holding it in for years. And it's kind of wild that instead of addressing her behavior, your husband gets upset at you for reacting. That double standard would drive anyone crazy. Anyways, that's all the stories I've got for today. I hope you enjoyed listening, or even just having this on in the background. If you have any subreddit suggestions, drop them in the comments and I'll check them out. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe with notifications to never miss an upload. But thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you in the next one.